Chapter 10. Her hair had been bleached, and there were some simple and obvious changes in her features. They had been altered just enough so it would be impossible to identify her from a photograph or a description. She could never be recognized. Except by me, that is. I had seen her in the stolen battleship, and I had talked to her. And the nice part was I could identify her, and she would have no idea of who I was. She had seen me only briefly in a spacesuit with a tin faceplate, and I'm sure had plenty of other things to think about at the time. This was the climax of the most successful day of my life. The fetid air of the dive was like wine in my nostrils. I relaxed and savored every last drop of irony in the situation. You had to give the girl credit, though. She had adopted a perfect cover. I myself had never imagined she would stay here, and I thought I had weighed all of the possibilities. Because she had taken a good bit of this stolen cash with her, I had never considered she would be living like a penniless tramp. The girl had guts. You had to give her credit. She had adopted an almost perfect disguise and blended neatly into the background. If only she wasn't oh damned kill happy, what a team we would make. My heart gave the second grinding thump of the evening when I realized the dead-end trail down which my emotions were leading me. Angelina was disaster to anyone she came near. Inside that lovely head squatted a highly intelligent but strangely warped brain. For my own sake, I would be better off thinking about the corpses she had piled up, not about her figure. There was only one thing to be done. Get her away from and turn her over to the Corps. I didn't even consider how I felt about the Corps or how they felt about me. This was an entirely different affair that had to be done neatly and with dispatch before I changed my mind. I joined her at the bar and ordered 2 double shots of the local battery acid. Being careful, I deepened my voice and changed my accent and manner of speaking. Angelina had heard enough of my voice to identify it easily. That was the one thing I had to be aware of. "Drink up, doll," I said, raising my drink and leering at her. "Then we go up to your place. You got a place, don't you?" "I got a place. You got a League 10 spot in hard change." "Of course," I grumbled, feigning insult. "You think I'm buying this bilge juice on the arm?" "I ain't no cafeteria, pay on your way out," she said with a bored lack of interest that was magnificent. "Pay now and then we go." When I flipped the 10 credits her way, she speared it neatly out of the air, weighed it, bit it, and vanished it inside her belt. I looked on with frank admiration, which she would mistake for carnal interest, but was in reality appreciation of the faultless manner with which she played her role. Only when she turned away did I make myself remember that this was business, not pleasure, and I had a stern duty to perform. My resolution was wavering, and I screwed it tight again with a memory of corpses floating in space. Draining my glass, I followed her marvelous rotation out of the bar and down a noisome alley. The dark decrepitude of the narrow passage jarred my reflexes awake. Angelina played her part well, but I doubted if she bedded down with all the space tramps who hit this port. There was a good chance that she had a confederate around who had a strong right arm with a heavy object clutched tightly in his hand. Or perhaps I'm naturally suspicious. My hand was on the gun in my pocket, but I didn't need to use it. We treaded across another street and turned into a hallway. She went first and we didn't talk. No one came near us or even bothered to notice us. When she unlocked her room, I relaxed a bit. It was small and tawdry, but offered no possible hiding place for an accomplice. Angelina went straight to the bed and I checked the door to see if it really was locked. It was. When I turned around, she was pointing a .75 caliber recoilless automatic at me, so big and ugly that she had to hold it in both tiny hands. "What the hell is the racket?" I blustered, fighting back the sick sensation that I had missed an important clue someplace along the line. My hand was still on the gun in my pocket, but trying to draw it would be instant suicide. "I'm going to kill you without ever even knowing your name," she said sweetly, with a cute smile that showed even white teeth. "But you have this coming. For ruining my battleship operation." Still she didn't fire. but her grin widened until it was almost a laugh. She was enjoying the uncontrolled expressions on my face as I recognized the fact that I had been outthought all the way, along the line, that the trapper was the trappee, that she had me exactly precisely where she wanted me, and there wasn't a single bloody damn thing I could do about it. Angelina finally had to laugh out loud, a laugh clear and charming as a sylph. Belle, as she watched me reach these sickening conclusions one after another. She was an artist to her fingertips and waited just long enough for me to understand everything. Then, at the exact and ultimate moment of my maximum realization and despair, she pulled the trigger, not once but over and over again, 4 tearing, thundering bullets of pain directly into my heart, and a final slug directly between my eyes. Chapter 11. It wasn't really consciousness, but a sort of ruddy, pain-filled blur. A gut-gripping nausea fought with the pain, but the pain won easily. Part of the trouble was that my eyes were closed, yet opening them was incredibly difficult. I finally managed it and could make out a face swimming in a blur above me. "What happened?" the blur asked. "I was going to ask you the same thing," I said, and stopped, surprised at how weak and bubbly my voice was. Something brushed across my lips, and I saw a red-stained pad as it went away. After I blinked some sight back into my eyes, Blurface turned out to be a youngish man dressed in white. A doctor, I suppose, and I was aware of motion. We must be driving. "In an ambulance. Who shot you?" the doctor asked. "Someone reported the shots, and you'll be pleased to know we got there just in the old nick of time. You've lost a lot of blood, some of which I've replaced, have multiple fractures of the radius. And ulna, an extensive bullet wound in your forearm, a further wound in your right temple, possible fracture of the skull, extremely probable fractures in your ribs, and the possibility of internal injuries. Someone got a grudge against. Who? My darling Angelina, that's who. Temptress, sorceress, murderess, that's who tried to kill me. I remembered now. The wide black muzzle of the gun looking big enough to park a spaceship in. The fire blasting out of it, the slugs hammering into me, and the pain as my expensive, guaranteed, bulletproof underwear soaked up the impact of the bullets, spreading it across the entire front of my body. I remembered the hope that this would satisfy her, and the despair of Ho. As the muzzle of that reeking gun lifted to my face, I remembered the last instant of regret as I put my arms before my face and threw myself sideways in a vain attempt at escape. The funny thing is that escape attempt had worked. The bullet that had smashed my forearm must have been deflected enough by the bone to carom off my skull, instead of catching it point blank and drilling on through. All this had produced satisfactory quantities of blood and an immobile body on the floor. That had caused Angelina's mistake, her only one. The boom of the gun in that tiny room, my apparent corpse, the blood, it must have all rattled the female side of her, at least a bit. She had to leave fast before the shots were investigated, and she had not taken that extra bit of time to make sure. "Lie down," the doctor said. "I'll give you an injection that will knock you out for a week if you don't lie down." Only when he said this did I realize I was sitting up in the stretcher and chuckling a particularly dirty laugh. I let myself be pushed down easily, since my chest was drenched in pain whenever I moved. Right at that moment, my mind began ticking over plans for making the most of the situation. Ignoring the pain as well as I could, I looked around the ambulance, looking for a way to capitalize on the bit of luck that had kept me still alive while she thought I was dead. We pulled up at the hospital then, and there was nothing much I could do in the ambulance except steal the stylus and official forms from the rack above my head. My right arm was still good, though it hurt like fire whenever I moved. A robot snapped the wheels down on my stretcher, latched onto it, and wheeled it inside. As it went by the doctor, he slipped some papers into a holder near my head and waved goodbye to me. I gave him back a gallant smile as I trundled into the butcher shop. As soon as he was out of sight, I pulled out the papers and scanned them quickly. Here lay my opportunity if I had enough time to grab it. There was the doctor's report in quadruplicate. Until these forms were fed into the machinery, I didn't exist. I was in a statistical limbo out of which I would be born into the hospital, stillborn if I had my way. I pushed my pillow off onto the corridor floor and the robot stopped. He paid no attention to my writing and didn't seem to mind stopping 2 more times to rescue the pillow, giving me time to finish my forgery. This Dr. MCVBLZ, at least that's what his signature reads like, had a lot to learn about signing papers. He had left acres of clear space between the last line of the report and his signature. I filled this with a very passable imitation of his handwriting. Massive internal hemorrhage, shock, I wrote. Died en route. This sounded official enough. I quickly added all attempts. Resuscitation failed. I had a moment of doubt about spelling this jawbreaker, but since Dr. MCVBKLZ thought there were 2 P-quotes in multiple, he could be expected to muff this one too. This last line made. Sure, there wouldn't be any hanky-panky with needles and electric prods to jazz some life back into the corpse. We turned out of the corridor just as I slipped the forms back into their slot and lay back trying to look dead. Here's a D. "O.A. Svend," someone called out, rustling the papers behind my head. I heard the robot rolling away, untroubled by the fact that his writing, pillow-shedding patient was suddenly dead. This lack of curiosity is what I like about Robe. I tried to think dead thoughts and hoped the right expression was showing on my face. Something jerked at my left foot and my boot and sock were pulled off. A hand grabbed my foot. How tragic, this sympathetic soul said. He's still waw. Or maybe we should put him on the table and get the revival team down. What a nosy, mealy-mouthed, interfering sod he was. Nah, the voice of a wiser and cooler head said from across the room. They tried the works in the ambulance. Slide. Him in the box. Terrifying pain lanced through my foot, and I almost gave the whole show away. Only the fiercest control enabled me to lie unmoving while this clown grimly tightened the wire around my big toe. There was a tag, hanging from the wire, and I heartily wished the same tag was hung from his ear, secured by the same throttling wire. Pain from the toe washed up and joined the ache in my chest, head and arm, and I fought for corpse-like rigidity as the stret trundled along. Somewhere behind me, a heavy door opened, and a wave of frigid air struck my skin. I allowed myself a quick look through my lashes. If the corpses in this chop shop were stashed into individual freezers, I was about to be suddenly restored to life. I could think of a lot more pleasant ways of dying than in an ice box with the door handle on the outside. Lady Luck was still galloping along at my shoulder, because my toe amputator was dragging me, sure and all, into a good-sized room. There were slabs on all sides, and a number of dearly departed had already arrived before me. With no attempt at gentleness, I was slid onto a freezing surface. Footsteps went away from me across the door closed heavily and the lights went out. My morale hit bottom at this moment. I had been through a lot for one day, and was thoroughly battered, bruised, contused, and concussed. Being locked in a black room full of corpses had an unusually depressing effect on me. In spite of the pain in my chest and the tag trailing from my toe, I managed to slide off the slab and hobble to the door. Panic grew as I lost my direction, easing off only when I walked square into the wall. My fingers found a switch and the lights came back on. And of course my moral fiber stiffened at the same moment. The door was perfectly designed. I couldn't have done better myself, with no window and a handle on the inside. There was even a bolt so that it could be locked from this side, though for what hideous reason I couldn't possibly imagine. It gave me some needed privacy though, so I slipped it into place. Although the room was full, no one was paying any attention to me. The first thing I did was unwind the wire and massage some life back into my numb toe. On the yellow tag were the large black letters DOA and a handwritten number, the same one that had been on the form I had altered. This was too good an opportunity to miss. I took the tag off the toe of the most badly battered male corpse and substituted mine. His tag I pocketed, then spent a merry few minutes changing around all the other tags. During this process, I took a right shoe from the corpse with the biggest feet and jammed my frozen left foot into it. All the tags were hung from the left big toe, and I loudly cursed such needless precision. My chest was bare where my ship suit and bulletproof cover had been cut away. One of my silent friends had a warm shirt he didn't need, so I borrowed that too. Don't think for a second that all this was easy. I was staggering and mumbling to myself while I did it, when it was finished. I slapped off the light and cracked the door of the freezer. The air from the hall felt like a furnace. There wasn't a soul in sight, so I closed the vault and staggered over to the nearest door. It was to a storeroom, and the only thing there that I could use was a chair. I sat in this as long as I dared, then went looking again. The next door was locked, but the third one opened to a dark room where I could hear someone breathing evenly in his sleep. This was more like it, whoever this sacti artist was. He surely knew his sleeping trade. I rifled the room and fumbled with the clothes I found and put them on clumsily, yet he never heard a sound, which was probably the best thing for him because I was in a skull fracturing. Humor. The novelty of this little affair had worn off, and all I could think about was the pain. There was a hat too, so I put this on and checked out. I saw people at a distance, but no one was watching when I pushed open an emergency exit and found myself back on the rain-drenched streets of Freiburgbad. Chapter 12. That night and the next few days are hazy in the memory for obvious reasons. It was a risk to go back to my room, but a calculated one. The chances were good that Angelina didn't know of its existence, or even if he had found out, that she wouldn't have done anything about it. I was dead, and she had no further interest in me. This appeared to be true because I wasn't bothered after I was in the room. I had the management send up some food and at least 2 bottles of liquor a day, so it would look like I was on an extended and solitary bender. The rot gut went down the drain, and I picked a bit at the food while my body slowly recovered. I kept my aching flesh drenched in antibiotics and loaded with painkillers, and counted myself lucky. On the third morning I felt weak, but almost human. My arm in the cast throbbed when I moved it. The black and blue marks on my chest were turning gorgeous shades of violet and gold, but my headache was almost gone. It was time to plan for the future. I sipped some of the liquor I had been using to flush out the plumbing and called down for the newspapers of the past 3 days. The ancient delivery tube disgorged them onto the table. Going through them carefully, I was pleased to discover that my plan had worked much better than should have been expected. The day after my murder, there had been items in every paper about it, grubbed from the hospital records by the slothful newshounds who hadn't even bothered to glance at the corpse. That was all. Nothing later about big hospital scandal in missing corpse or suit brought, because that's not Uncle Frim in the coffin. If my jigger repokery in the frozen meat locker had been uncovered, it was being kept a hospital family secret, and heads were rolling in private. Angelina, my sharpshooting sweetheart, must then think of me as securely dead, a victim of her own murderous trigger finger. Nothing could be better. As soon as I was able to, I would be getting back on her trail again, the job of tracking her made immensely simpler by her believing me to be a wisp of greasy smoke in the local crematorium. There was plenty of time now to plan this thing, and plan it right. No more funny business about who was hunting whom. I was going to get as much pleasure out of arresting Angelina as she had derived from blasting away at me with her portable artillery. It was a humiliating but true fact that she had outmaneuvered me all the way down the line. She had stolen the battleship from under my nose, torn a wide swath through galactic shipping, then escaped neatly right under my gun. What made the situation most embarrassing was that she had set a trap for me when I thought I was hunting her. Hindsight is a great revealer of obviousities, and this one was painfully clear now. While escaping from the captured battleship, she had not been hysterical in the slightest. That role had been feigned. She had been studying me, every bit of my face that could be seen, every intonation of my voice. Hatred had seared my picture in her memory, and while escape. She must have considered constantly how I would be thinking when I followed her. At the safest and least obvious spot in her flight, she had stopped and waited. Knowing I would come, and knowing that she would be more prepared for the encounter than I was, this was all past history. Now it was my turn to deal the cards. All kinds of schemes and plans trotted through my head to be weighed and sampled. Top priority before anything else was attempted would be a complete physical change. For me, this would be necessary if I wanted to catch up with Angelina. It was also required if I were to stay out of the long reach of the Corps. The fact had not been mentioned during my training, but I was fairly sure the only way. If one left the Special Corps was feet first. Though I was physically down and out, there was nothing wrong with the old think box, and I put it to use. Facts were needed, and I gave a small endowment to the city library in the form of renta. Fees. Fortunately, there were film copies of all the local newspapers available, going back for years. I made the acquaintance of an extremely yellowish journal endearingly called Hot News. Hot News, aimed at a popular readership. With a vocabulary I estimated at approximately 300 words who relished violence in its multiform aspects. Most of the time these were just copter accidents and such, with full color photos of course. But very often, there were juicy muggings, sluggings and such which proved the quieting hand of galactic civilization still hadn't throttled Fravor completely. In among these exaggerated tales of violence lay the murky crime I was searching for. Mankind. It has always been capricious in its lawmaking, inventing such intriguingly different terms as manslaughter, justified homicide and such, as if dead wasn't dead. Though fashions in both crime and sentencing come and go, there is one crime that will always bring universal detestation. That is the crime of being a bungling doctor. I have heard tell that certain savage tribes used to slaughter the physician if his patient died, a system that is not without merit. This single minded loathing of the butchering quack is understandable. When ill, we deliver ourselves completely into the doctor's hands. We give a complete stranger the opportunity to toy with that which we value most. If this trust is violated, there is naturally a hotness of temper among the witnesses or survivors. Ordinary citizen Wolf Sifternitz had formerly been the highly esteemed Dr. Sifternitz. Hot News explained in overly lavish detail how he had mixed the life of playboy and surgeon, until finally the knife in his twitching fingers had cut that, instead of this, and the life of a prominent politician had been shortened by a number of no doubt profitable years. We must give Wolf credit for the fact he had made an attempt to sober up before going to work, so that it was DT's not drunkenness that caused the fatal twitch. His license was removed, and he must have been fined most of his savings since there were later references to his having been involved in more sordid medical affairs. Life had treated Wolf hard and dirty. He was just the man I was looking for. On my first rubber-legged trip out of my room, I took the liberty of paying him a professional call to a person of my abilities tracking down a pseudo-legal stranger in a foreign city on a far planet. Presents no problems. Just a matter of technique, and I am rich in technique. When I hammered on the stained wooden door in the East Wholesome section of town, I was ready to take the first step in my new plan. I have some business for you, Wolf, I told the bleary-eyed Stewie who opened the door. Get the hell lost, he said, and tried to close the door in my face. My carefully placed shoe prevented this, and it took almost no effort at all to push in past him. I don't do any medical work, he mumbled, looking at my bandaged arm. Not for police stoolies, I don't, so get the hell lost. Your conversation is both dull and repetitious, I told him, because it was. I am here to offer you a strictly legitimate business deal with value given for money received. The mere fact that it happens to be illegal should bother neither of us, least of all you. I ignored his mumbled protests and looked into the next room. According to information of great reliability, you live here in unmarried bliss with a girl named Xena. What I have to say is not for her outwardly shell-like ears. Where is she? Out, he shouted, and you too out? He clutched a tall bottle by the neck and raised it threateningly. Would you like that? I asked and dropped a thick wad of fresh bank notes on the table. And that, Anne? That, I followed with 2 more bundles. The bottle slipped from his loose fingers and fell to the floor while his eyes bulged out further and further as if they were on pistons. I added a few more bundles to the pile until I had his undivided attention. It really didn't take much discussion. Once he had assured himself that I really meant to go through with the proposition, it was just a matter of settling the details. The money had an instantly sobering effect on him, and he had a tendency to twitch and vibrate. There was nothing wrong with his reasoning powers. Just one last problem, I said as I started to leave. What about the worthy Xena? Are you going to tell her about this? You crazy? Wolf asked with undisguised surprise. I suppose that means you won't tell her. Since only you and I are going to know about this operation, how are you going to explain your absence or where the money has come from? This was even more shocking to him. Explain to her? She isn't going to see either me or the money once I leave here, which will be no more than 10 minutes from now. I see, I said, and I did. I also thought it was rather uncharitable of him since the Xena had been supporting him by practicing a trade that most women shun. I made a mental note to see what could be done to even the score a little. In the future, though. Right now I had to see to the dissolution of James Bolivar. diGriz. Sparing no expense, I ordered all the surgical and operating room equipment that Wolf could suggest. Whenever possible, I bought robot-controlled devices since he would be working alone. Everything was loaded in a heavy carrier, rented for the occasion, and we drove out to the house in the country together. Neither of us would trust the other out of his sight, which was of course understandable. Financial payments were the hardest to arrange since the pure-hearted Dr. Wolf was sure I would bash in his skull and take back all of my money once the job was finished, never realizing, of course, that as long as there were banks, I would never be broke. The safeguards were finally arranged to his satisfaction, and we and our solitary and important business. The house was lonely and self-contained, perched on the cliff above a far reach of the lake. What fresh food we needed was delivered once a week, along with the mail, which consisted of drugs and other medical supplies. The operations began, modern surgical techniques being what they are. There was of course no pain or shock. I was confined to bed, and at times was loaded with so much sedation that days passed in a dreamy fog. Between 2 periods of radical surgery, I took the precaution of seeing that a sleeping pill was included in Wolf's evening drink. This drink was of course non-alcoholic, since his traveling this entire course mounted on the water wagon was one of the conditions of our agreement. Whenever he found it difficult, I restored his resolution with a little more money. All this continence had his nerves on edge, and I thought he would appreciate a good night's sleep. I also wanted to do a little investigating. When I was sure he was deeply under, I picked the lock of his door and searched his room. I suppose the gun was there as a matter of insurance, but you can never tell with these nervous types. My days of being a target were over if I had anything to say about it. The gun was a pocket model of a recoilless .50, neat and deadly. The mechanism worked fine and the cartridges still held all their deadly power, but there would be some difficulty in shooting the thing after I filed off the end of the firing pin. Finding the camera was no shock, since I have very little faith left in the basic wholesomeness of mankind. That I was his benefactor and financier wasn't enough for Wolf. He was lining up some blackmail just in case. There was plenty of exposed film, no doubt filled with studies of my unconscious face before and after. I put all the film, including the unexposed rolls, under the X-ray machine for a nice long treatment, and that settled that. Wolf did a good job in the times when he wasn't moaning about the absence of spirituous beverages or nubile females. Bending and shortening my femurs altered my height and walk. Hands, skull, ears, all of these were changed permanently to build a new individual. Skillful use of the correct hormones caused a change in the pigment cells, darkening the natural color of my skin and hair, even altering the hair pattern itself. The last thing done when Wolf's skill was at its peak was a delicate touch on my vocal cords that deepened and roughened my speech. When it was all finished slippery, Jim diGriz was dead and Hans Schmidt was born. Not a very spy. Name, I admit, but it was just designed to cover the period before I shed Wolf and began my important enterprise. Very good indeed, I said, looking into the mirror and watching my fingers press a stranger's face. Odd, I could use a drink, Wolf gasped behind me, sitting on his already packed bags. He had been hitting the medical alcohol the last few days until I had spiked it with my favorite regurgitant, and he was nervously anxious to get back to some heavy drinking. Give me the balance of the money that's due and let's get out of here. Patience, doctor, I murmured and slipped him the packet of bills. He broke the bank wrapper and began to count them with quick, caressing touches of his fingers. Waste of time doing that, I told him, but he kept right on. I've taken the liberty of writing stolen on each bill with ink that will fluoresce when the bank puts it under the ultraviolet. This stopped the counting all. Right, and drained him white at the same instant. I ought to warn him about the old ticker. That's the way he would pop off if he didn't watch out. What do you mean, stolen? He choked after a bit. Well, they were, you know, all of the money I paid you with was stolen. His face went even whiter, and I was sure he would never reach 50, not with circulation like that. You shouldn't let it worry you. The other stuff was all in old bills. I've passed a lot of it without any trouble. But why? He finally squeezed out. Sensible question, doctor. I've sent the same amount in untampered bills, of course, to your old friend Zena. I felt you owed her that much at least, after all she has done for you. Fair is fair, you know. He glared at me while I tossed all the machines, surgical supplies, and such off the cliff. I was careful not to have my back to him when he was too close. Other than this, all the precautions had already been taken. And I glanced up by chance and saw that a covert smile had replaced the earlier expression. I knew it was time to reveal the rest of my arrangements. An air cab will be here in a few minutes. We'll leave together. I regret to inform that there won't be enough time after we arrive in Freiburg for you to seek out Zena and thrash her as planned, and get the money back. His guilty start proved that he was really an amateur at this sort of thing. I continued, hoping he would be grateful for this complete revelation of how to do things in an efficient criminal manner. I've timed everything rather carefully from here on in. Today is a bit unusual in that there are 2 starships leaving the port within minutes of each other. I've booked a ticket on one for myself. Here is your ticket on the other. I've paid in advance for it, though I don't expect you to thank me. He took the ticket with all the spirited interest of an old maid picking up a snake. The need for speed, if you will pardon the rhyme, is urgent. A few minutes after your ship leaves, an envelope will be delivered to the police describing your part in this operation. Dear Dr. Wolf digested all this as we aided for the copter to arrive, and from his sickening expression, I saw he could find no flaws in the arrangements. During the entire flight, he huddled away from me in his chair and never said a word. Without a bon voyage or even a cur, he made for his ship upon our arrival, and I watched him board it. I, of course, merely went in the direction of mine and turned off before entering it. I had as much intention of leaving Freiburg as I had of informing the police that an illegal operation had taken place. The last thing I wanted was attention. Both little lies had merely been devices to make sure that the alcoholic doctor went away and stayed away before he began his solitary journey to Sura. There was no reason for me to leave, in fact, every reason for me to stay. Angelina was still on this planet, and I wanted no interference while I tracked her down. Perhaps it was presumptuous of me to be so positive. Yet I felt I knew Angelina very well by this time. Our crooked little minds rotated in many of the same cycles of dishonesty. Up to a certain point, I felt I could predict her reactions with firm logic. Firstly, she would be very happy about my bloody destruction. She got the same big bang out of corpses that most girls get from new clothes. Thinking me dead would make following her that much easier. I knew she would take normal precautions against the police and other agents of the Corps. But they wouldn't know she was on Freiburg. There was nothing to connect my death with her presence. Therefore, she didn't have to run again, but could stay on this planet under a new cover and changed personality. That you would want to stay here, I had very little doubt. Freiburg was a planet that seemed designed for illegal operation. In my years of knocking around the known universe, I had never before come up against a piece of fruit so ripe for lucking. A heady mixture of the old and the new. In the old, caste-ridden, feudalistic Freiburg, a stranger would have been instantly recognized and watched. On the modern League planet's computers, mechanization, robots, and an ever-vigilant police force left very little room for illegal operations. It was only when these two different cultures are mixed and merged that imaginative operations became really possible. This planet was peaceful enough. You had to give the League Societics experts credit for that much. Before they brought in the first antibiotic pill or punch card computer, they saw to it that law and order were firmly instituted. Nevertheless, the opportunities were still there if you knew where. A look. Angelina knew where to look, and so did I. Except after weeks of futile investigation, I finally faced the brutal fact that we were both looking for different things. I can't deny the time was spent pleasantly since I uncovered countless opportunities for fine jobs and lucrative capers. If it hadn't been for the pressure of finding Angelina, I do believe I could have had the time of my life in this crook's paradise. This pleasure was denied me because the pressure to catch up with Angelina nagged at me constantly like an aching tooth. Finding intuition wanting, I tried mechanical means. Hiring the best computer available, I fed entire libraries into its memory circuits and set it countless problems. In the course of this kilowatt-consuming business, I became an expert on the economy of Freiburg, but in the end was no closer to finding Angelina than I had been when I started. She had a driving urge for power and control, but I had no idea in what way it would find its outlet. There were many economic solutions I turned up for grabbing the reins of Freiburg society, but investigation showed that she was involved in none of these. The King Wilhelm Roman 9 seemed the obvious pressure point for actual physical control of the planet. A complete investigation of Will, his family and close royal relatives, turned up some juicy scandal but no Angelina. I was stopped dead. While drowning my sorrows in a bottle of distilled spirits, the solution to this dilemma finally struck me. Admittedly, I was sodden with drink at the time, yet the paralysis of my neural axons was undoubtedly the source of the idea. Any man that says he thinks better drunk than sober is a fool, but this was a different case altogether. I was feeling, not thinking, and my anger at her escape cracked the lid off my more civilized impulses. I choked a pillow to death, imagining it was her neck, and finally shouted, "Crazy, crazy, that's her trouble," all the way around the bend and dotty as polka dots. When I fell onto the bed, everything swooped around and around in sickening circles, and I mumbled, "Just plain crazy. I would have to be crazy myself to figure out which way she will jump next." With this, my eyes closed and I fell asleep, while the words swam down through the alcohol-saturated layers until they reached a deeper level, where a spark of rationality still dwelled. When they hit bottom, I was wide awake and sitting up in bed, struck dumb by the ghastly truth. It would require all the conviction I had and a little more to do it. I would have to follow her down the path of insanity if I wanted to find her. Chapter 13. In the cold light of morning, the idea didn't look any more attractive or any less true. I could do it, or not do it, as I chose. There could be no doubting the wild tinge of insanity that colored Angelina's life. One of our contacts had been marked by a ruthless indifference to human life. She killed with coldness or with pleasure, as when she had shot me, but always with total disregard for people. I doubt if even she had any idea of how many murders she had committed in her lifetime. By her standards, I was a rank amateur. I hadn't killed more than that kind of violence was rarely necessary in my type of operation, surely no more than none. Well, old chicken heart. It revealed at last. Rough and tough, diGriz the killer who never killed. It was nothing to be ashamed of, quite the opposite in fact. I placed a value on human life, the one unchanging value in existence. Angelina valued herself and her desires, and nothing else. To follow her down the twisted path of her own making, I would have to place myself in the same mental state that she lived in. This is not as difficult as it sounds, at least in theory. I have had some experience with the psychotomimetic drugs and was well aware of their potency. Centuries of research have produced drugs that can simulate any mental condition in the user. Like to be paranoid for a day? Take a pill. You too can go around. The bend, friend. It is a matter of record that people have actually tried these concoctions for kicks, but that bored with life I don't want to be. There would have to be a lot stronger reason before I would subject my delicate gray cells to this kind of jarring around, like finding Angelina, for instance. About the only good thing about these pixelation producers is the accepted fact that the effects are only temporary. When the drug wears off, so do the hallucinations, I hoped. Nowhere in the texts I studied did they mention a devil's brew such as the one I was concocting. It was a laborious task hunting down all of Angelina's fascinating symptoms in the textbooks and trying to fit them to an inclusive psychotic pattern. I even called in some professional help to aid in analyzing her case, not mentioning, of course, to what use I intended to put the information. In the end, I had a bottle of slightly smoky liquid and a aped recording of auto-hypnotic suggestions to play into my ears while the shot was taking effect. All that remained was screwing my courage to the sticking place, as they say in the classics. Not really all that remained. I wanted to take some precautions first. I rented a room in a cheap hotel and left orders not to be disturbed at any time. This was the first time I had ever tried this particular type of nonsense, and since I had no idea of how foggy my memory would be, I left a few notes around to remind me of the job. After a half day of this kind of preparation, I realized I was making excuses. Well, it's not easy to deliberately go insane, I told my rather pale reflection. In the mirror. The reflection agreed, but that didn't stop either of us from rolling up our sleeves and filling large hypodermic needles with murky madness. Here's looking at you, I said, and slipped the needle gently in the vein and slowly pushed the plunger home. The results were anticlimactic, to say the least. Outside of a ringing in my ears and a twinge of headache that quickly passed, I felt nothing. I knew better than to go out, though, so I read the newspaper for a while, until I felt tired. The whole thing seemed a little foolish and pretty much of a letdown. I went to sleep with the tape player whispering softly in my ears such ego-building epigrams as, "You are better than everyone else and you know it," and "Peep. Well, who don't know it had better watch out. And they are all fools, and if you were in charge things would be different. And why aren't you in charge? It's easy enough." Waking up was uncomfortable because of the pain in my ears where the earphones are still plugged in, my own stupid voice droning away at me. Nothing had changed, and the whole futile experiment was a waste, and waste makes me angry. The earphones broke in my hands, and I felt better, felt much better still when I had stamped the tape player into a tangle of rubble. My face rasped when I ran my hand over it. I had been days without a shave. Rubbing in the dip cream, I looked into the mirror over the sink, and an odd fact struck me for the first time. This new face fitted me a lot better than the old one. A fault of birth, or the ugliness of my parents, whom I hated deeply. The only right thing they ever did was to produce me had given me a face that didn't fit my personality. The new one was better, handsomer for one thing, and a lot stronger. I should have thanked that fumblefinger Quack Wolf for producing a masterpiece. I should have thanked him with a bullet. That would guarantee that no one would ever be able to trace me. Through him. It must have been a warm day, and I was suffering a fever when I let him get safely away like that. On the table was a piece of paper with a single word written on it. My own handwriting, though I can't imagine why the hell I'll effed it there. Angelina, it said, Angelina, how I would love to get that tender white throat between my hands and squeeze until your eyeballs popped. Ha, I had to laugh at the thought, made a funny picture indeed. Yet I shouldn't be so flippant about it. Angelina was important. I was going to find her, and nothing was going to stop me. She had made a fool of me and had tried to kill me. If anyone deserved to die, it was her. It was an awful waste in some way. Yet it had to be done. I shredded the note into fine pieces. All at once the room was very oppressing and I wanted out. What made me doubly angry was the fact the key was missing. I remember taking it out, but had no idea where I'd put it. The slob at the desk was slow at answering, and I was tempted to tell him just what I thought of the service, but I refrained. There is only one permanent cure for these types. A spare key rattled into the basket of the pneumo, and I let myself out. I needed some food and I needed some drink, and most of all I needed a quiet place for some thought. A nearby spot provided all three after I had chased the hookers away. They were all dogs and Angeline. Just playing a role had been better than this entire crowd lumped together. Angelina. She was on my mind tonight with a vengeance. The drinks warmed my gut, and Angelina warmed my memory. To think that I had actually once considered turning her in or possibly killing her. What a waste. The only intelligent woman I had ever run across, and all woman, I'll never forget the way she walked in that dress. Once she had been tamed a bit, what a team we could make. This thought was so mentally aphrodisiac that my skin burned, and I drained my glass at a single swallow. Something had to be done. I had to find her. She would never have left a ripe plum of a planet like this one. A girl with her ambition could go right. At the top here, nothing could stop her. And that's of course where she would be eventually, if not now. She must spend her life feeling damned because she was a woman, knowing she was better than the rest of the cruds around, then proving it to herself. Offend them over and over again. My arrival would be the biggest favor Angelina could have. I didn't have to prove myself better than the Hicks on this rubified planet. Just one look did that. When Angelina hooked up with me, she could stop fighting, relax, and take orders. The contest would be over for all time. While I sat there, something was nagging at me, some vital fact I had to remember yet couldn't. For a second I fumbled with the memory before I realized what it was. The injection would be wearing off soon. I had to get back to the room quickly. There had been some fear about the danger of this business, but I realized now that was just my earlier cowardice. This stuff was no more dangerous than Asper. And at the same time it was the galaxy's greatest pickup. New worlds of possibilities were opening up to me, my mind was clearer and my thoughts more logical. I wasn't going back to the old muddled head stuff. At the bar I paid. The bartender, my fingers tapping impatiently while he slothfully made change for me. A wise guy, I asked, loud enough for everyone in the joint to hear. A customer is in a hurry, so that's your chance to shortchange him. This is two Gilden short. I held the money out in my palm, and when he bent to count it, I came up quick with the hand and let him have the whole thing right in the face, bills, coins, thumb, and fingers. At the same time, I told him in a low voice. Oh, no one else could hear just what I thought of him. Freiber slang is rich in insult, and I used the best on him. I could have done more, but I was in a hurry to get back to the hotel room, and teaching him a lesson would take time. When I turned to go, I kept an eye behind me in a mirror across the room, and it's a good thing I did. He pulled a length of pipe out from under the bar and raised it over my head. Of course I stood still to give him a nice target, and now it threw off his aim, only stepping aside as the arm came down, just moving enough to let the pipe skin by me. It was no trick at all to grab the arm, keep it going down, and break the bone across the edge of the bar. The screams were heartwarming to say the least, and I only wish I had the time to stay and really give him something to scream about. There was just no time left. You saw him viciously attack me, I told the stunned customers as I headed for the door. Rough and Tough had slumped down and was moaning out of sight somewhere behind the bar. I'm going to call the police now, see that he doesn't leave. Of course he had as much intention of leaving as I had of calling the law. I was out or long before any of them had made their minds up as to just what was going on. Of course I couldn't run and draw any attention to myself. Getting back to the hotel at a fast walk was the best I could do, but I was sweating all over. From the tension. Inside the room, the first thing I saw was the container on the table, with the needle wrapped in cloth beside it. My hands didn't shake, but they would have if I had let them. This was a very close thing. Collapsed in a chair afterwards, I held up the jar and saw that there was less than a millimeter of juice left. The very next thing on the agenda was the necessity of laying in a supply of the stuff. I could remember the formula clearly and would have no trouble rebuilding it, of course. There would be no drug suppliers open at this time of night, but that made things a lot easier. There is a law of history that says weapons were invented before money. In my suitcase was a recoilless .75 that could get me more of the galaxy's goods than all of the money in existence. That was my mistake. Some nagging worry gnawed me then, but I ignored it. The tension and then the relief after getting the shot had me all loosened up. On top of that was the need to hurry. The limited time I had to find what I needed and get it back to the hotel room. My thoughts were on the job and how best to do it as I unlocked the suitcase and reached for my gun lying right there on top of the clothes. At this point, the thin voice in my memory was screaming inaudibly to me, but this only made me reach faster for the gun. Something was badly wrong, and this was the thing that would fix it. As I grabbed the butt, the memory broke through just a little bit too slow. But dropping the gun, I dived for the door, too late by far. Behind me, I heard a pop as the sleep gas grenade I had put under the gun let go. Even as I fell forward into darkness, I wondered how I could ever have possibly done such a stupid thing as that. Chapter 14. Coming out of the gas, my first feeling was one of regret. It is a truism that the workings of the mind are a source of constant astonishment. The effects of my devil's brew had worn off. There was nothing wrong with my memory. Now that the post-hypnotic blocks I had put on it had been removed. All too vividly, I could recall the details of my interlude of madness. Though I sickened at the things I had thought and done, I simultaneously felt a twinge of regret. That could not be abolished. There had been terrible freedom in standing so alone that even the lives of other men meant less than nothing. Undoubtedly a warped sensation, but still a tremendously attractive one, like taking drugs, even while detesting the thought, I felt the desire for more of the same. In spite of my 12 hours of forced sleep, I was exhausted. It took all of my energy to drag over to the bed and collapse on it. Foresight had provided a bottle of stimulant, aiding spirits, and I poured a glassful. Sipping at this, I tried to put my mental house in order. Not a very easy task. I have read many times about the cesspool of dark desires that lies in our subconscious minds, but this was the first time I had ever had mine stirred up. It was quite revealing to examine some of the things that had floated to the surface. My attitude towards Angelina needed a good looking at. The most important fact I had to face was the strong attraction. And I felt for her. Love. Put any name to it you want, I suppose love will do as well as any, though this was no throbbing, adolescent passion. I wasn't blind to her faults. In fact, I rather detested them now that I knew her murderously. Moral existence had an echo in my own mind. But logic and convictions have very little to do with emotions. Hating this side of her didn't remove the attraction of a personality so similar to my own. I echoed my psychotic selves. Attitude, what a team we might have made. This was of course impossible, but that didn't stop me from wanting it. Love and hate are reputed to be very close, and in my case they were certainly rubbing shoulders. And the whole confused business wasn't helped in the slightest by the fact that Angelina was so damnably attractive. I took a long drag at my drink. Finding her should be easy now. The carelessness with which I took this for granted was a little shocking. I had gained no new information while mentally aberrant, just a great chunk of insight into the tortured grooves that my Angelina's mind trundled along. There could be no doubt that raw power was what she desired. This couldn't be obtained through influencing a king. I saw this now. Violence was the way, a power putsch, perhaps assassination, certainly revolution and turmoil of some kind. This had been the pattern in the bad old days on Freiburg, when sovereignty had been the prize of battle. Any of the nobility could be crowned, and whenever the old king's grip weakened, it was a cue for a power struggle that would produce the new monarch. Of course, that sort of thing had stopped as soon as the societic specialists from the League worked their little. Ricks, the old days were on the way back, that was clear. Angelina was going to see this world bathed in blood and death to satisfy her own ambition. She was out there now, somewhere grooming the man for the job. One of the counts, still very important in the semi-feudal economy, was having his ego inflated and guided by a new power behind the throne. This is the pattern Angelina had used before, and would be sure to use again. There could be no doubt, only one small actor was missing. Who was the man? My dive into the depths of self-analysis had left a definitely unwholesome taste in my mouth that no amount of liquor could wash away. What I needed was a little touch of action to tone up my drooping nerve ends and accelerate my sluggish blood. Tracking down Angelina's front man would be just the charge my battery needed. Merely thinking about it helped, and it was with eagerness that I searched the newspaper for the court news column. There was a grand ball just 2 days distant, the perfect cover for this operation. For these 2 days, I was kept busy on the many small tasks that put the polish of perfection on a job like this. Any boob can crash a party, in fact, usually does, since that is all one seems to meet at this kind of affair. It takes a unique talent like mine to construct a cover personality that is unshakable. Research supplied me with a homeland, a distant province poor in everything except a thick dialect that provided the base for most Freiburg jokes. Because of these inherent handicaps, the populace of Misteldros was noted for its pugnacity and general bull-headedness. There were minor nobility there, who one took much notice of, or kept any records about, enabling me to adopt the cover of Grav-Bent Diebstahl. The family name meant either bandit or tax-gatherer in the local dialect, which gives you an idea of the kind of economy they had, as well as the source of the family title. A military tailor cut me a dress uniform, and while I was being fitted, I memorized great chunks of the family history to bore people with. I saw where I could be the life of any party. Another thing I did was to send off a thick wad of money to the maimed bartender, who was now working with the handicap of having his arm in a cast. He really had shortchanged me, but his suffering was entirely out of proportion to this minor crime. My anonymous gift was strictly conscience money, and I felt much better after having done it. A moonlight visit to the royal printers supplied an invitation to the party. My uniform fitted like a sausage. My boots gleamed enthusiastically, and I was one of the first guests to arrive since the royal table had a tremendous reputation and work had increased my appetite. I crashed and clattered wonderfully when I bowed to the king's spurs and sword. They go all the way with the archaic nonsense on Freiburg, and looked at him closely while he mumbled something inaudible. His eyes were glassy and unfocused, and I realized there was some truth in the rumor that he always got stoned on his private bottle before coming to one of these affairs. Apparently he hated crowds and parties, and much preferred to putter with his bugs. He was an amateur entomologist of no small talents. I passed on to the queen, who was much more receptive. She was 20 years his junior and attractive in a handsomely inflated, bovine way. Rumor also had it that she was bored by his beetles and much preferred Homo sapiens to Lepidoptera. I tested this calumny by giving her hand an extra little squeeze when I held it, and Queenie squeezed back with an expression of great interest. I moved on to the buffet. While I ate, the guests continued to arrive. Watching them as they entered didn't interfere with my demolishing the food or sampling all of the wines. I had finished stoking up by the time the rest were just starting, so I could circulate among them. All of the women were subjected to my very close scrutiny, and most of them enjoyed it because, if I say so myself, with my new face and the fit of the uniform I cut a mean swath through the local types. I really wasn't expecting to run across Angelina's trail this easily, but there was always the chat. Only a few of the women even remotely resembled her, but it took only a few words each time to settle the fact that they were true blue blood, and not my little interstellar killer. This task was made simpler by the fact that the Freyber beauties ran heavily towards the flesh, and Angelina was a neat and petite package. I went back to the bar. "You have been given a royal command," an adenoidal voice said in my ear while fingers plucked at my sleeve. I turned and gave my best scowl to the character who still clutched the fabric. "Let go the suit, or I push your buck-toothed face the punch bowl in," I growled in my thickest Misteldrossian accent. He let go as if he had grabbed something hot and got all red and excited looking. "That's better," I added, cutting off his next words. "Now who wants to see me the king? Her Majesty, the Queen," he managed to squeeze out between thin lips. "That's good, I want to see her too. Show the I forged a way through the crowd while my new friend clattered behind, trying to pass me. I stopped before I reached the group around Queen Helda and let him get ahead, all out of breath and sweating. "Your Majesty, this is the Baron." "Grav, not Baron," I cut in with my hideously rich accent. "Grav Bent Deepstall from a poor provincial family, cheated centuries ago of our rightful title by thieving and jealous counts." I scowled straight at my guide as if he had been in the plot, and he turned the flush on again. "I don't recognize all of your honors, Grav Bent," the Queen said in her low voice that reminded me of pastures on a misty morn. She pointed to my manly chest, to the row of decorations I had purchased from a curio dealer just that morning. "Galactic medals, Your Majesty. A younger son of the provincial nobility, his family impoverished by the greedy and corrupt, can find little opportunity to advance himself here on Freyber. That is why I took service off-planet and served for the best years of my youth in the Stellar Guard. These are for commonplace happenings such as battles, invasions, and spaceboardings. But this is the one I can really take pride in." I fingered through the jingling hardware until I came to an unsightly thing, all comets, novas, and sparkling lights. "This is the Stellar Star, the most prized award in the Guards." I took it in my hand and gave it a long look. In fact, I think it was a guard decoration, given out for re-enlisting or 5 years of KP or some such. "It's beautiful," the Queen said. Her taste in metals was no better than her taste in clothes, but what can you expect on these backward planets? "It is that," I agreed. "I don't enjoy describing the metal's history, but if it is a royal command." It was, and given very coyly indeed. I lied about my exploits for a while and kept them all interested. There would be plenty of talk about me in the morning, and I hoped some of it would trickle down to Angelina's ears, wherever she was hiding. Thinking of her took the edge off my fun, and I managed to excuse myself and go back to the bar. I spent the rest of the evening talking up the wonders of my imaginary history to everyone I could nail. Most of them seemed to enjoy it, since the court was normally short on laughs. The only one who didn't seem to be getting a charge out of it was myself. Though the plan had seemed good at first, the more I became involved with it, the slower it appeared. I might flutter around the fringe of these fantastically dull court circles for months without finding a lead to Angelina. The process had to be accelerated. There was one idea drifting in and out of my head, but it bordered on madness. If it misfired, I would be either dead or barred from these noble circles forever. This last was a fate I could easily stand, but it wouldn't help me find my lovely quarry. However, if the plan did work, it would shortcut all the other nonsense. I flipped a coin to decide, and of course won since I had palmed the coin before the toss. It was going to be action. Before coming, I had pocketed a few items that might come in handy during the course of the evening. One of them was a surefire introduction to the king in case I felt that getting nearer to him might be of some importance. I slipped this into an outer pocket, filled the largest glass I could find with sweet wine, and trundled through the cavernous rooms in search of my prey. If King Wilhelm had been crocked when he arrived, he was now almost paralyzed. He must have had a steel bar sewn into the back of his white uniform jacket, because I swear his own spine shouldn't have held him up. But he was still drinking and swaying back and forth, his head bobbing as though it were loosely attached. He had a crowd of old boys around him, and they must have been swapping off color stories, because they gave me varying degrees of get-lost looks when I trundled up and snapped to attention. I was bigger than most of them, and must have made a nice blob of color because I caught Villy's eye, and the head slowly slewed around in my direction. One of his octogenarian cronies had met me earlier in the evening and was forced to make the introduction. "A very great pleasure to meet your majesty," I droned with a bit of a drunken blur to my voice. Not that the king noticed, but some of the others did and scowled. I am by way of being a bit of an entomologist myself, if you will pardon the expression, hoping to follow in your royal footsteps. I am keen on this and feel that greater attention should be paid on Freyber, more respect given, I should say, and more opportunity taken to utilize the advantageous aspects of the foraminifera, Lepidoptera, and all the other. Heraldry, for instance, the flags might utilize the more visual aspects of insects. I babbled on like this for a while, the crowd getting impatient with the unwanted interruption. The king, who wasn't getting in more than one word into, and got tired of nodding after a while, and his attention began to wander. My voice thickened and blurred, and I could see them wondering how to get rid of the drunk. When the first tentative hand reached out for my elbow, I played my trump. "Ard, because of your majesty's interest," I said, fumbling in my pocket. I carefully kept this specimen, carrying it across countless light years to reach its logical resting place, your highness's collection. Pulling out the flat plastic case, I held it under his nose. With an effort, he blinked his watery eyes back into focus and let out a little gasp. The others crowded around, and I gave them a few seconds to enjoy the thing. Well, it was a beautiful bug, I can't deny that. However, it had not traveled across countless light years, because I had just made it myself that morning. Most of the parts were assembled from other insects, with a few pieces of plastic thrown in where nature had let me down. Its body was as long as my hand, and it had 3 sets of wings, each set in a different color. There were a lot of legs underneath, pretty mismatched, I'm afraid, since they came from a dozen other insects, and a lot of them got mashed or misplaced during construction. Some other nice touches, like a massive stinger, 3 eyes, a corkscrew tail, and such like, were not lost on my rapt audience. I had had the foresight to make the case of tinted plastic, which blurred the contents nicely and hinted at rather than revealed them. "But you must see it more closely, your highness," I said, snapping open the case while both of us swayed back and forth. This was a difficult juggling act, as I had to hold the case in the same hand as my wine glass, leaving my other hand free to grasp the monstrosity. I plucked it out between thumb and forefinger, and the king leaned close, the drink in his own glass slopping back and forth in his eagerness. I squeezed just a bit with my thumb, and the bug popped forward in lively fashion and dived into the king's glass. Save it, I cried. "A valuable specimen?" I plunged my fingers in after it and chased it around and around. Some of the drink lopped out, staining Wilhelm's gilt-edged cuff. A gasp went up and angry voices sounded. Someone pulled hard at my shoulder. "Leave off, you title-stealing clots," I shouted and pulled away roughly from the grasp. The drowned insect flew out of my fingers and landed on the king's chest, from where it fell slowly to the floor, shedding wings, legs, and other parts on the way. I must have used a very inferior glue. When I leaped to grab the dropping corpse, the forgotten drink in my other hand splashed red and sticky onto the king's jacket. A howl of anger went up from the crowd. I'll say this much for the king, he took it well. Stood there swaying like a tree in the storm, but offering no protest outside of mumbling, I say a few times. Not even when I rubbed the wine in with my handkerchief, treading on his toes by accident as the crowd behind pushed too close. One of them pulled hard at my arm, then let go when I shrugged. My arm struck against Wilhelm Roman IX's noble chest, and his royal upper plate popped out on the floor to add to the fun. Fun it was too, once the old boys got cleared away. The younger nobility leaped to their majesty's defense, and I showed them a thing or two about mix-it-up fighting that I had learned on a number of planets. They made up in energy what they lacked in technique, and we had a really good go-around. Women screamed, strong men cursed, and the king was half carried out of the fur. Akkas, after that things got dirty and I did too. I couldn't blame them, but that didn't stop me from giving just as good as I received. My last memory is of a number of them holding me while another one hit me. I got him in the face with the shoe on my free leg, but they grabbed that too, and his replacement turned off all the lights. Chapter 15. Uncivilized as my behavior had been, the jailers persisted in treating me in a most civilized fashion. I grumbled about this and made their job as hard as possible. I hadn't voluntarily entered prison in order to win a popularity contest. Pulling all those gags on the poor old king had been a risk. Lèse-majesté is the sort of crime that is usually punishable by death. Happily, the civilizing influences of the League had penetrated darkest. Rayber and the locals now fell over backwards to show me how law-abiding they were. I would have none of it. When they brought me a meal, I ate it, then destroyed the dishes to show my contempt for this unlawful detention. This was the bait. The ruses I had suffered would be a small enough price to pay if my attempt at publicity paid off in the right quarters. Without a doubt, I was being discussed. A figure of shame, a traitor to my class, a violent man in a peaceful world, and a audacious, combative, uncompromising one at that. In short, I was all the things a good Freyberian detested, and the sort of a man Angelina should have a great deal of interest in. In spite of its recent bloody past, Freyber was woefully short of roughneck manpower. Not at the very lowest levels, of course. The portside drinkeries were stuffed with muscle-bound apes with pinhead brains. Angelina would be able to recruit all of those she needed. But strongarm squads alone wouldn't win her a victory. She needed allies and aid from the nobility, and from what I had seen, this sort of talent was greatly lacking. In my indirect manner, I had displayed all the traits she would be interested in, doing it in such a way that she wouldn't know the show had been arranged only for her. The trap was open, all she had to do was step into it. Metal boomed as the turnkey rapped on the door. "You have visitors, Grav Diebstahl," he said, opening the inner grill. "Tell them to go to hell," I shouted. "There's no one on this poxy planet I want to see." Paying no attention to my request, he bowed in the governor of the prison and a pair of ancient types wearing black clothes and severe looks. I did the best I could to ignore them. They waited grimly until the guard had gone. Then the skinniest opened a folder he was carrying and slowly drew out a sheet of paper with his fingertips. "I will not sign a suicide note, so you can butch." "Or me in my sleep," I snarled at him. This rattled him a bit, but he tried to ignore it. "That is an unfair suggestion," he intoned solemnly. "I am the royal attorney and would never condone such an action." All three of them nodded together as though they were pulled by one string, and the effect was so compulsive that I almost nodded myself. "I will not commit suicide voluntarily," I said harshly to break the spell of agreement. "That is the last word that will be it on the subject." The royal attorney had been around the courts long enough not to be thrown off his mark by this kind of obliquity. He coughed, rattled the paper, and got back to basics. "There are a number of crimes you could be charged with." "Young man," he droned, with an intensely gloomy expression draped on his face. I yawned, unimpressed. "I hope this will not have to be done," he went on, "since it would only cause harm to all concerned. The king himself does not wish to see this happen, and in fact has pressed upon me his earnest desire to have this affair ended quietly now. His desire for peace has prevailed upon us all, and I am here now to put his wish into action. If you will sign this apology, you will be placed aboard a starship leaving tonight. The matter will be ended. Trying to get rid of me to cover up your drunken brawls at the palace, hey?" I sneered. The attorney's face purpled, but he controlled his temper with a magnificent effort. If they threw me off the planet now, everything was wasted. You are being insulting, sir, he snorted. You are not without blame in this matter, remember. I heartily recommend that you accept the king's leniency in this tragic affair and sign the apology. He handed the paper to me, and I tore it to pieces. Apologize? Never, I shouted at them. I was merely defending my honor against your drunken louts and larcenous nobility, all descended from thieves who stole the titles rightly belonging to my family. They left then, and the prison governor was the only one young and sturdy enough for me to help on the way with the toe of my shoe in the appropriate spot. Everything was as it should be. The door clanged shut behind them on a rebellious, cantankerous, belligerent son of the Freiburg soil. I had arranged things perfectly to bring me to the attention of Angelina, but unless she became interested in me soon, I stood a good chance of spending the rest of my days behind these grim walls. Waiting has always been bad for my nerves. I am a thinker during moments of peace, but a man of action most of the time. It is one thing to prepare a plan and leap boldly into it. It is another thing altogether to sit around a grubby prison cell wondering if the plan has worked, or if there is a weak link in the chain of logic. Should I crack out of this pokey? That shouldn't be hard to do, but it had better be saved for a last resort. Once out, I would have to stay undercover, and there would be no chance of her contacting me. That was why I was gnawing my way through all my fingernails. The next move was up to Angelina. All I could do was weigh. I only hoped that she would gather the right conclusions from all the violent evidence I had supplied. After a week, I was stir-crazy. The royal attorney never came back, and there was no talk of a trial or sentencing. I had presented them with an annoying problem, and they must have been scratching their heads feebly over it and hoping I would go away. I almost did. Getting out of this backwoods jail would have been simplicity itself. But I was waiting for a message from my deadly love. I toyed with the possibilities of the things she might do. Perhaps arrange pressure through the court to have me freed, or smuggle in a file and a note to see if I could break out on my own. This second possibility appealed to me more. And I shredded my bread every time it arrived to see if anything had been baked into it. There was nothing. On the 8th day, Angelina made her play in the most forthright manner of her own. It was night, but something unaccustomed woke me. Up. Listening produced no answers, so I slipped over to the bard opening in the door and saw a most attractive sight at the end of the hall. The night guard was sprawled on the floor, and a burly masked figure dressed completely in black stood over him with a kosh in one meaty hand. Another stranger, dressed like the first, came up, and they dragged the guard further along the hall towards me. One of them rummaged in his waist wallet and produced a scrap of red cloth that he put between the guard's limp fingers. Then they turned towards my cell, and I moved back out of sight, climbing noiselessly into bed. A key grated in the lock, and the lights came on. I sat up blinking, giving a fine imitation of a man waking up. "Who's there? What do you want?" I asked. "Up quickly and get dressed, Diebstahl. You're getting out of here." This was the first thug I had seen, the blackjack still hanging from his hand. I sagged my jaw a bit, then leaped out of bed. With my back to the wall. "Assassins," I hissed. "So that's vile King Villy's bright idea, is it? Going to put a rope around my neck and swear I hung myself? Well, come on, but don't think it will be easy. Don't be an idiot," the man whispered, "and shut the big mouth. We're here to get you out. We're friends." 2 more men, dressed the same way, pushed in behind him, and I had a glimpse of a 4th one in the hall. "Friends," I shouted. "Murderers is more like it. You'll pay dearly for this crime." The 4th man, still in the hall, whispered something, and they charged me. I wanted a better glimpse of the boss. He was a small man if he was a man. His clothes were loose and bulky, and there was a stocking mask over his entire head. Angelina would be just about that tall. But before I could get a better look, the thugs were on me. I kicked one in the stomach and ducked away. This was fighting barroom style, and they had all the advantages, without shoes or a weapon. It didn't stand a chance, and they weren't afraid to use their koshes. I tried hard not to smile with victory as they worked me over. Only reluctantly did I allow myself to be dragged to the place where I wanted to go. Chapter 16. Because the pounding on the head had only made me groggy, one of them broke a sleep capsule under my nose, and that was that for a while. So, of course, I had no idea of how far we had traveled or where on Freiburg. They must have given me the antidote because the next thing I saw was a scrawny type with a hypodermic injector in his hand. He was peeling back my eyelid to look, and I slapped his hand away. Going to torture me before you kill? Me, swine, I said, remembering the role I had to play. Don't worry about that, a deep voice said behind me. You are among friends, people who can understand your irritation with the present regime. This voice wasn't much like Angelina's. Neither was the burly, sour-faced owner. The medic slid out and left us alone, and I wondered if the plan had slipped up somewhere. Iron Jaw with the beady eyes had a familiar look. I recognized him as one of the Freiberian nobility. I had memorized the lot, and looking at his ugly face, I dredged up a mnemonic. A midget painted bright red. Ardenrunt, the Count of Ardenrunt, I said, trying to remember what else I had read about him. I might believe you were telling me the truth if you weren't His Highness's first cousin. I find it hard to consider that you would steal a man from the royal jail for your own purposes. It's not important what you believe, he snapped angrily. He had a sure fuse, and it took him a moment to get his temper back under control. Wilhelm may be my cousin, that doesn't mean I think he is the perfect ruler for our planet. You talked a lot about your claims to higher rank, and the fact that you had been cheated. Did you mean that? Or are you just another parlor windbag? Think well before you answer. You may be committing yourself. There may be other people who feel as you do, that there is change in the wind. Impulsive, enthusiastic, that was me. Loyal friend and deadly enemy, and just solid guts when it came to a fight. Jumping forward, I grabbed his hand and pumped it. If you are telling me the truth, then you have a man at your side who will go the whole course. If you are lying to me and this is some trick of the king's, well then, Count, be ready to fight? No need to fight, he said, extracting his hand with some difficulty from my clutch. Not between us at least. We have a difficult course ahead of us, and we must learn to rely upon each other. He cracked his knuckles and looked glumly out the window. I sincerely hope that I will be able to rely on you. Freiburg is a far different world from the one our ancestors ruled. The League has sapped the fight from our people. There are none I can really rely on. There's nothing wrong with the bunch who took me out of my cell. They seem to do the job well enough. Muscle, he spat, and pressed a button on the arm of his chair. Thugs with heads of solid stone. I can hire all of those I need. What I need are men who can help me to lead Freiburg into its rightful future. I didn't mention the man who led the muscle the previous night. The one who had stayed in the corridor. If Ardenrunt wasn't going to talk about Angelina, I certainly couldn't bring up the topic. Since he wanted brain, not brawn, I decided to give him a little. Did you dream up the tour? And piece of uniform left in the guard's hand in the prison. That was a good touch. His eyes narrowed a bit when he turned to look at me. You're quite observant, Bent, he said. A matter of training, I told him, trying to be both unassuming and positive at the same time. There was this piece of red cloth with a button in the guard's hand, like something he had grabbed in a struggle. Yet all of the men I saw were dressed only in black. Perhaps a bit of misdirection, with each passing moment I'm getting happier that you have joined me, he said, and showed me all of his ragged teeth in an expression he must have thought was a grin. The old Duke's men wear red livery, as you undoubtedly know, and the old Duke is the strongest supporter of Wilhelm Roman IX, I finished for him. It wouldn't hurt in the slightest if he had a falling out with the king. Not the slightest, Ardenrunt echoed, and showed me all of his teeth again. I was beginning to dislike him intensely. If this was the front man Angelina had picked for her operation, then he was undoubtedly the best one for the job on the planet. But he was such a puffed-up crumb, with barely enough imagination to appreciate the ideas. Angelina was feeding him, yet I imagine he had the money and the title and the ambition, which combination she had to have. Once more I wondered where she was. Something came in through the door and I recoiled, thinking the war was on. It was only a robot, but it made such a hideous amount of hissing and clanking that I wondered what was wrong with it. The Count ordered the ghastly thing to wheel over the bar. As it turned away, I saw what could only have been a chimney projecting behind one shoulder. There was the distinct odor of coal smoke in the air. "Does that robot burn coal?" I gurgled. "It does," the Count said, pouring us out a pair of drinks. "It is a perfect example of what is wrong with the Freiberian economy. Under the gracious rule of Wilhelm the Incompetent, you don't see any robots like this in the capital." "I should hope not," I gasped, staring bug-eyed at the trickle of steam escaping from the thing, and the stains of rust and coal dust on its plates. Of course I've been away a long time. Things change. They don't change fast enough, and don't act galactic-wise with me, Diebstahl. I've been to Misteldros and seen how the rubes live. You have no robots at all much. Less a contraption like this." He kicked at the thing in sullen anger, and it staggered back a bit, valves clicking open as steam pumped into the leg pistons to straighten it up. 200 years come next Grundlovsday, we will have been in them. Milked dry and pacified by them, and for what? To provide luxuries for the king in Freiberbad. While out here, we get a miserable consignment of a few robot brains and some control circuitry. We have to build the rest of the inefficia monsters ourselves. And out in the real sticks where you come from, they think robot is a misspelling of a boat that goes with oars. He drained his glass, and I made no attempt to explain to him the economics of galactic commerce planning, Terry prestige, or the multifold levels of intercommunication. This lost planet had been cut off from the mainstream of galactic culture for maybe 1,000 years, until contact had been re-established after the breakdown. They were being eased back into the culture gradually, without any violent repercussions that might upset the process. Sure, 1 billion robots could be dumped here tomorrow. What good would that do the economy? It was certainly much better to bring in the control units and let the locals build the things for themselves. If they didn't like the final product, they could improve the design instead of complaining. The Count, of course, didn't see it this way. Angelina had done a nice job of playing up on his prejudices and desires. He was still glaring at the robot when he leaned forward and suddenly tapped a dial on the thing's side. "Look at that," he shouted. "Down to 80 pounds pressure. Next thing you know, the thing will be falling on its face and burning the place down. Stoke, you idiot, Stoke." A couple of relays closed inside the contraption, and the robot clanked and put the tray of glasses down. I took a very long drag on my drink and enjoyed the scene. Rundling over to the fireplace at a slower pace now, I'll admit, it opened a door in its stomach and flame belched out. Using the coal scoop in the pail, it shoveled in a good portion of anthracite and banged the fire door shut again. Rich black smoke boiled from its chimney. At least it was housebroken and didn't shake out its grate here. "Outside, damn it, outside," the Count shouted, coughing at the same time. The smoke was a little thick. I poured another drink and decided and that I was going to like Ardenrund. I would have liked it a lot better if I could have found Angelina. This whole affair bore every sign of her light touch, yet she was nowhere in sight. I was shown to a room and met some of the officers on the Count's staff. One of them, Kurt, a youth of noble lineage but no money, showed me around the grounds. The place was a cross between a feudal keep and a small town, with a high wall cutting it off from the city proper. There appeared to be no obvious signs of the Count's plans, outside of the number of armed retainers who lounged about and practiced uninterestedly in the shooting ranges. It all looked too peaceful to be true, yet I had been brought here. That was no accident. I tried a little delicate questioning, and Kurt was frank with his answers. Like a lot of the far country gentry, he bore a grudge against the central authorities, although he would of course never have gotten around to doing anything about it. On his own, somehow he had been recruited and was ready to go along with the plans, all of which were very vague to him. I doubt if he had ever seen a corpse. That he was telling me the truth about everything was obvious when I caught him in his first lie. We had passed some women and bent a knee, and Kurt had volunteered the advice that they were the wives of 2 of the other officers. "And you're married too?" I asked. "No, never had the time, I guess. Now I suppose it's too late. At least for a while. When this whole business is over and life is a little more peaceful, there'll be plenty of time to settle down." "How right," I agreed. "What about the Count? Is he married? I've been away so many years that it's hard to keep track of that kind of thing, wives, children, and such." Without being obvious, I was watching him when I asked this, and he gave a little start. "Well, yes, you might say. I mean, the Count was married, but there was an accident. He's not married now." His voice tapered away, and he drew my attention to something else, happy to leave the topic. "Now, if there is one thing that always marks Angelina's trail, it is a corpse or two. It took no great amount of inspiration to connect her with the accidental death of the Count's wife. If the death had been natural, Kurt would not have been afraid to talk about it. He didn't mention the topic again, and I made no attempt to pump him. I had my lead. Angeline. It may not have been in sight, but her spoor was around me on all sides. It was just a matter of time now. As soon as I was able to, I would shake Kurt and hunt up the Bullet boys who had spirited me out of the jail. Buy them drinks to assure them that there were no hard feelings about the beating they had given me. Then pump them adroitly about the man who had led them. Angelina made her move first. One of the coal-burning robots came hissing and clanking around with a message. The Count would like to see me. I slicked my hair, tucked in my shirt, and reported for duty. I was pleased to see that the Count was a steady and solitary daytime drinker. In addition, there was very little tobacco in his cigarette. The sweet smoke filled the room. All this meant he was due for early dissolution, and I would not be numbered among his mourners. None of this showed in my expression or attitude, of course. I was all flashing eye and acting attention. "Is it action, sir? Is that why you sent for me?" I asked. Sit down," he mumbled, waving me towards a chair. "Relax, want a cigarette?" He pushed the box towards me, and I eyed the thin brown cylinders with distaste. "Not today, sir. I'm laying off smoking for a while, sharpening up the old eye, keeping the old trigger finger limber and ready for action." The Count's mind was occupied elsewhere, and I doubt if he heard a word I said. He chewed abstractedly at the inside of his cheek while he looked me up and down. A decision finally struggled up through his half-clotted brain. "What do you know about the Raidbrechen family?" he asked, "which is about as exotic a question as I have ever had thrown at me." "Absolutely nothing," I answered truthfully. "Should I?" No, he answered vaguely and went back to chewing his cheek. I was getting high just from breathing the air in the room, and I wondered how he was feeling. "Come with me," he said, pushing over his chair and almost falling on top of it. We plodded through a number of halls deeper into the building until we came to a door no different from the ones we had passed, except this one had a guard in front of it, a rough-looking brawny type with his arms casually crossed, just casual enough to let his fingers hang over his pistol grip. He didn't budge when we came up. "It's all right," the Duke of Ardenrant said with what I swear was a peevish tone. "He's with me." "Gotta search him anyway," the guard said. "Orders. More and more interesting. Who issued orders the Count couldn't change in his own castle, as if I didn't know." And I recognized the guard's voice. He was one of the men who had taken me from my prison cell. He searched me quickly and efficiently, then stepped aside. The Count opened the door, and I followed him in, trying not to tread on his heels. One thing about reality, it is always so much superior to theory. I had every reason to believe that Angelina would be here, yet it was still a healthy shock to see her sitting at the table. A kind of electric charge in my spine tingled right up to the roots of my hair. This was a moment I had waited for a very long time. It took a positive effort to relax and appear indifferent, at least as indifferent as any healthy young male is in front of an attractive package of femininity. Of course, this girl didn't resemble Angelina very much, yet I still had no doubt. The face was changed, as was the color of the hair. And though the face was a new one, it still held the same sweet, angelic quality as the old. Her figure was much the way I remembered it, with perhaps a few slight improvements. Hers was a surface transformation, with no attempt at being as complete as the one I had done to me. "This is Grav Bent Diebstahl," the Count said, fixing his hot and smoky little eyes on her. "The man you wanted to see, Angela." So she was still an angel, though under a different name. That was a bad habit she should watch, only I wasn't going to tell her. A lot of people have been caught by taking an alias too similar to their old one. "Why, thank you, Cassiter," she said. "Cassiter indeed. I'd look unhappy too if I had to go through life with a handle like Cassiter Ardenrunt. It was very nice of you to bring Grav Bent. Here," she added in the same light and empty voice. Cassie must have been expecting a warmer welcome, because he stood first on one foot and then another, and mumbled something which neither of us heard. But Angela's welcome stayed at the same temperature, or perhaps dropped a degree or two as she shuffled some papers on the table in front of her. Even through his fog, the Count caught on and went out mumbling something else under his breath that I was pretty sure was one of the Shaw and more unwholesome words in the local dialect. We were alone. "Why did you tell all those lies about being in the Stellar Guard?" she asked in a quiet voice, apparently still busy at the papers. This was my cue to smile sardonically and flick some imaginary dust from my sleeve. "Well, I certainly couldn't tell all those nice people what I've really been doing all these years I've been away, could I?" I responded with wide-eyed simplicity. "What were you doing, Bent?" she asked, and there wasn't a trace of any emotion in her voice. "That's really my business, isn't it?" I told her, matching toneless tone for tone. "And while we're asking questions, I would like to know who you are and how come you seem to throw more weight around than the great Count Cassiter." I'm good at playing this kind of guessing game, but Angie was just as good and dragged the conversation back to her own grounds. "Since I am in the stronger position here, I think you'll find it wise to answer my questions. Don't be afraid of shocking me. You would be surprised at the things I know about." "No, Angelica, love, I wouldn't be surprised at all, but I couldn't just tell all without a little resistance." "You're the behind this revolution idea, aren't you?" I said as a statement, not a question. "Yes," she said, laying her cards on the table so she could see mine. "Well, if you must know then," I said, "I was smuggling. It is a very interesting occupation if you happen to know what to take where. For a number of years, I found it was a most lucrative business. Finally, though, a number of governments felt I was giving them unfair competition, since they were the only ones allowed to cheat at the public. With the pressure on, I returned to my sluggish native land for a period of rest. Angel Mine was buying no sealed packages, and gave me an exhaustive cross-examination into my smuggling career that showed she had more than a assing knowledge of the field herself. I had, of course, no trouble answering her questions, since in my day I have turned many a megacredit in this illegal fashion. The only thing I was afraid of was making it too good, so I described a career of a successful, but still young and not too professional operator. All the time I was talking, I tried to live the role and believe everything I said. This was a crucial time when I must let drop no hints or mannerisms that might bring slippery Jim diGriz to her mind. I had to be the local punk who had made good and was still on my way up in the universe. Mind you, our talk was of course almost casual, and carried on in an atmosphere of passing drinks and lighting cigarettes, all designed to relax me enough to make a few slips. I did, of course, slipping in a lie or two about my successes that she would catch and credit to boyish enthusiasm. When the chit-chat slowed, I tried a question of my own. "Would you mind telling me what a local family named Raidbrechen has to do with you?" "What makes you ask?" she said so calm and coolly. "Your smiling friend Cassiter Ardenrunt asked me about them before we came." I told him I knew nothing. "What's their connection with you?" "They want to kill me," she said. "That would be a shame and a waste," I told her with my best come-hither grin. She ignored it. "What can I do about it?" I asked, going back a business, since she didn't seem interested in my masculine attractions. "I want you to be my bodyguard," she said, and when I smiled and opened my mouth to speak, she went on. And please spare me any remarks about how it is a ba. Do you would like to guard? I get enough of that from Cassiter. All I wanted to say was that I accepted the position, which was a big lie because I had had some such phrase in mind. It was hard to stay ahead of Angelina, and I mustn't. Relax for an instant, I reminded myself again. Just tell me more about the people who are out to kill you. It seems that Count Ardenrunt was married, Angelica said, toying with her glass in a simple, girlish way. His wife admitted suicide in a very stupid and compromising manner. Her family, who are of course the Raidbrechen, think I killed her, and want to revenge her supposed murder by killing me in turn. Apparently in this lost corner of Freiburg, the Indetta still has meaning, and this family of rich morons still subscribe to it. All at once, the picture was getting clearer. Count Ardenrunt, a born opportunist, aided his noble fortunes by marrying the daughter of this family. This must have worked well enough until Angelina came along. Then the extra wife was in the way, and ignorant of this charming local custom of revenge killing. Angelina had removed a stumbling stone. Something had gone wrong, probably the Count had bung Gold from the look of the man, and now the vendetta was on. And my angel wanted me to interpose my frail flesh between her and the killers. Apparently she was finding this retarded planet more than she had bargained for. Now was the time? Or me to be bold? Was it suicide? I asked. Or did you kill her? Yes, I killed her, she said. The sparring was over and all our cards were on the table. The decision was up to me. Chapter 17. Well, what else was there to do? I hadn't come this far, getting myself shot, bashed on the head and well-stomped, just to arrest her. I mean, I was going to arrest her, of course, but it was next to impossible in the scent, or of the Count's stronghold. Besides that, I wanted to find out a bit more about the Count's proposed uprising, since this would certainly come within the jurisdiction of the Special Corps. If I was going to re-enlist, I had better bring a few prizes to show my good intentions. Anyway, I wasn't so sure I wanted to re-enlist. It was a little hard to forget that scuttling charge they had tried to blow up under me. The whole thing wasn't so simple. There were a lot of things mixed up in this. One fact being that I enjoyed Angelina, and most of the time I was with her, I forgot about those bodies floating in space. They returned at night all right and chopped at my conscience, but I was always tired and went to sleep quickly before they could get through and bother me. Life was a bed of roses, and I might as well enjoy it before the blossoms withered. Watching Angelady at work was a distinct pleasure, and if you stood my back to the wall and made me swear, I would be forced to admit that I learned a thing or two from her. Single-handedly, she was organizing a revolution on a peaceful planet, and it stood every chance of succeeding. In my small way, I helped. The few times she mentioned a problem to me, I had a ready answer, and in all the cases she went along with my suggestions. Of course, I had never toppled governments before, but there are basic laws in crime as in everything else, and it is just a matter of application. This didn't happen often. Most of the time during those first few weeks, I was a plain bodyguard, keeping a wary eye out for assassins. This position had a certain ironical angle that appealed to me greatly. However, there was a serpent in our little Eden of insurrection, and his name was Ardenrunt. I never heard much, but from a word caught here and there, I began to see that the Count wasn't really cut out to be a revolutionary. The closer we came to the day, the more pallid he became. His little physical vices began to add up, and one day the whole thing came to a head. Angelegant and the Count were in a business session, and I sat in the anteroom outside. I shamelessly eavesdropped whenever I could, and this time I had managed to leave the door open a crack after I had checked her into the room. Careful manipulation with my toe opened it a bit more until I could hear the murmur of their voices. An argument was progressing nicely. There were a lot of them at this time, and I could catch a word here and there. The Count was shouting, and it was obvious that he wouldn't give in on some simple and necessary piece of blackmail to advance the cause. Then his Own changed, and his voice dropped so I couldn't hear his words, strain as I might. There was a saccharine wheedle and whine in his voice, and Angelina's answer was clear enough. A loud and positive no. His bellow brought me to my feet. Why not? It's always no now, and I've had enough of it. There was the sound of tearing cloth, and something fell to the floor and broke. I was through the door in a single bound. For a brief instant, I had a glimpse of a struggling tableau as he pulled at her. Angelina's clothing was torn from one shoulder, and his fingers were sunk into her arms like claws. Clubbing my pistol, I ran forward. Angelina was a bit faster. She pulled a bottle from the table and banged it into the side of his head with neat efficiency. The Count dropped as if he had been shot. She was pulling up her torn blouse when I came roaring to a halt. "Put the gun away, bent it's all over," she said in a calm voice. I did, but only after making sure the Count was really out, hoping an extra slam might be needed. But she had done a good job. When I stood up, Angelina was already halfway out of the room, and I had to run to catch up with her. The only other thing she said was, "Wait here," when she steamed into her room. It took no great power of divination to see that there was trouble coming if it hadn't already arrived. When the Count came to with a busted head, he would undoubtedly have some second thoughts about Angelina and revolutions. I thought on these and related subjects while I matched coins with the guards. A few minutes later, Angelina called me in. A long robe covered her arms so the bruises he had made weren't visible. Though outwardly composed, there was a telltale glint in her eyes that meant she was doing a slow burn. I spoke what was undoubtedly the uppermost thought in her mind. "Want me to fix it, so the Count joins his noble ancestors in the family?" She shook her head no. "He still has his uses. I managed to control my temper, so you had better hold yours. Mine's in great shape, but what makes you think you can still get work on cooperation out of him? He's going to have an awful sore head when he comes to." Minor factors like this didn't bother her. She dismissed the thought with a wave of her hand. "I can still handle him and make him do whatever I want within limits. The limitations are his own natural abilities, which I didn't realize were so slight when I picked him to head this revolt. I'm afraid his cowardice is slowly destroying any large hopes I might have had for him. He will still have value as a figurehead, and we must use him for that, but the power and decisions must be ours." I wasn't being slow, just wary. I chewed around her statements from all sides before I answered. "Just what is this we and ours business? Where do I fit in?" Angelil. It leaned back in her chair and tossed a lock of her lovely golden hair to one side. Her smile had about a 2,000-volt charge and was aimed at me. "I want you to come in with me on this thing," she said with a voice rich as warm. "Honey, a partnership. We'll keep the Count of Ardenrunt out in front until the plan succeeds, then eliminate him and go the rest of the way ourselves. Do you agree?" "Well," I said. Then, with brilliant inspiration, "Well, again." For the first time in a lifetime of verbal pyrotechnics, I found the flow shut off. I paced the room and pulled my scattered wits together. "I hate to look a gift rocket in the tubes," I told her. "Nevertheless, why me? A simple but hard-working bodyguard who will guard your person, labor for the cause, and look forward to the restoration of his stolen lands and title. How come the big jump from office boy to board chairman? You know better than to ask that," she said and smiled, and the temperature of the room rose 10 degrees. "I think you can handle this job as well as I can and enjoy doing it. Working together, you and I will make this the cleanest revolt that ever took over a planet." "What? Ooh, you say?" I was pacing behind her as she talked. She stood up and took me by the arm, stilling my restless walking. I could feel the warmth of her fingers burning through my thin shirt. Her face was in front of me, smiling, and her voice pitched so low that I barely heard it. "It would be something, wouldn't it? You and I together. Wouldn't it? There are occasions when words can't say it all and your body speaks for you. This was a time like that, without physical deliberation." My arms were around her, pulling her to me, my mouth pushing down on hers. For the briefest of instants she was the same, her arms tight on my shoulders, her lips alive. just for a sliver of time so brief that afterwards I couldn't be sure that I hadn't imagined it. Then the warmth was suddenly drained away and everything was wrong. She didn't fight me or attempt to push back, but her lips were lifeless under mine and her eyes open, looking at me with a sterile emptiness. She did nothing until I had dropped my arms and stepped away, then she seated herself stiffly in the chair again. "What's wrong?" I asked, not trusting myself to say more. "A pretty face, is that all you think of?" she asked, and the words seemed pulled from her in sobs. Expressing real emotions didn't come easily with her. "Are you men all alike all the same? Nonsense," I shouted, angered in spite of myself. "You wanted me to kiss, you don't deny it. What changed?" "Your mind. Would you want to kiss her?" Angelina screamed, torn by emotions I couldn't understand. She pulled at a thin chain around her neck. It snapped and she half threw it at me. There was a tiny locket on the chain, still warm fra her body. It had an image enlarger in it, and when held at the right angle, the picture inside could be seen clearly. I had the chance for only a single glimpse at the girl in the photograph. Then Angelina changed her mind and pulled it away, pushing me towards the door at the same time. It slammed behind me, and I heard the heavy safety bolts thud home. Ignoring the guard's raised eyebrows, I stamped down the hall to my own room. My emotions had triumphed nicely over my powers of reason, and apparently Angelina's had too for just an instant. Yet I couldn't understand her cold withdrawal or the significance of the picture. Why did she wear it? I had only had a single glimpse of the contents. But that was enough. It was the photo of a young girl, a sister perhaps? A tragic thing, one of those horrible proofs of the law of chance that an almost infinite number of combinations are possible. This girl was cursed with ugliness. That is the only way to describe it. It was no single factor of a bent back, adenoidal jaw, or protruding nose. Instead, it was the damning combination of traits that combined to form a single repellent whole. I didn't like it, but what did it matter? I sat down suddenly with the clear realization that I was being incredibly stupid. Angelina had given me a simple brief glimpse into the dark motivations that had made her, shaped her life, of course. The girl in the picture was Angelina herself. With this realization, so many other things became clear. Many times when looking at her, I had wondered why that deadly mind should be housed in such an attractive package. The answer was clearly that I wasn't looking at the original package that had shaped the mind. To be a man and to be ugly is bad enough. What must it feel like to a woman? How do you live when mirrors are your enemies and people turn away rather than look at you? How do you bear lie when at the same time you are blessed or cursed with a keen and intelligent mind that sees and is aware of everything, makes the inescapable conclusions, and misses not the slightest hint of repulsion? Some girls might commit suicide, but not Angelina. I could guess what she had done. Hating herself, loathing and detesting her world and the people on it, she would have had no compunction about committing a crime to gain the money she wanted. Money for an operation to correct one of those imperfections. Then more money for more operations. Then someone who dared to stop her in this task, and the ease and perhaps pleasure with which she killed him. The slow upward climb through crime and murder to beauty. And during a climb, the wonderful brain that had been housed in the ill-formed flesh had been warped and changed. Poor Angelina. I could be sorry for her without forgetting the ones she had killed. Poor, tragic, alone girl who in winning half the battle had lost the other half. Purchased skill had shaped the body into a lovely, truthfully, and angelic form. Yet in succeeding, the strength of the mind that had accomplished all this had been deformed until it had been made as ugly as the body had been in the big inning. Yet if you could change a body, couldn't you change a mind? Could something be done for her? The very pressure and magnitude of my thoughts drove me out of the small room and into the air. It was nearing midnight, and the guards would be staying below and all the doors locked. Rather than face the explanations and simple mechanical difficulties, I climbed upwards instead. There would be no one in the roof gardens and walkways this time of night. I could be alone. Freiburg has no but it was a clear night, and the stars cast enough light to see by. The roof guard saluted when I went by, and I could see the red spark of a cigarette in his hand. I should have said something about it, but my mind was too occupied. Passing on, I turned a corner and stood leaning on the parapet, looking out unseeingly at the black bulk of the mountains. Something kept gnawing for attention, and after a few minutes I recognized what it was. The guard. He was there for a purpose. And smoking on duty wasn't considered the best behavior for a sentry. Perhaps I was being finicky, but it is a failing of mine. Take care of all the small factors and the big ones take care of themselves. In any case, simply thinking about it was bothering me, so I might as well go around and say a word to him. He wasn't at his usual post, which was optimistic. At least he was making the rounds and keeping an eye on things. I started to walk back when I noticed the broken flowers hanging from the edge of the garden. This was most unusual because the roof gardens were the Count's special pleasure and were practically manicured daily. Then, I saw the dark patch in among the flowers and had the first intimation that something was very, very wrong. It was the guard, and he was either dead or deeply unconscious. I didn't bother to find out which. There was only one reason I could think of for someone to be here at night like this. Angeline. Her room was on the top floor, almost below this spot. Silently, I ran to the decorative railing and looked over. 5 meters below was the white patch of the balcony outside her window. Something black and formless was crouched there. My gun was in my room. For one of the few times in my life, I had been so disturbed that my normal precautions were forgotten. My concern over Angelina was going to cost her her life. All of this I realized in a fraction of a second. And as my fingers ran along the balustrade, a shiny blob was fixed there, anchoring a strand so thin that it was invisible, yet I knew was as strong as a cable. The assassin had lowered himself with a web spinner, a tiny device that spun in strand like a spider. Only the strand's substance was formed of a single long-chain molecule that could support a man's weight. It would slice my hands like the sharpest blade if I tried to slide down it. There was only one way I would reach that balcony, a tiny square above the 2-kilometer drop into the valley below. I made the decision even as I was leaping up onto the rail. It had a wide, flat top, and I sat for an instant to catch my balance. Below me, the window swung open noiselessly and I dropped, my heels extended, aiming for the man below. I turned in the air and instead of hitting him squarely, I caromed off his shoulder and we both sprawled onto the balcony. It shivered under the impact, but the ancient stone held. The fall had half stunned me, and with pain-blurred reasoning I hoped that his shoulder felt as bad as my leg. For a few moments I could do nothing but gasp for breath and try to scramble towards him. A long, thin-bladed knife had been knocked from his hand by the impact, and I could see it glittering where he reached for it. His fingers clutched it just as I attacked. He grunted and made a vicious stab at me that brushed my sleeve. Before he could draw back, I had his knife wrist in my hand and clamped on. It was a silent, nightmare battle. Both of us were half dazed from my drop, yet we knew it was life we were battling for. I couldn't stand because of my bruised leg, and he was instantly on top of me, heavier and stronger. He couldn't use the arm I had landed on, but it took all the strength of both my arms to hold away the menacing blade. There was no sound other than our horse panting. This assassin was going to win as weight, and remorseless strength brought the knife down. Sweat almost blinded me, but I could still see well enough to notice the twisted way his other arm hung. I had broken a bone when I hit, yet he had never made sound. There is no such thing as fair fighting when you are struggling for your life. I squirmed my leg out from under him and managed to bend it enough to dig the knee into his broken arm. His whole body shuddered. I did it again. Harder. He twisted, trying to pull away from the pain. I heaved sideways, throwing him off balance. His elbow bent as he tried to save himself from falling, and I put all my strength in both hands, turning that sinewy wrist and driving them. And backwards. It almost worked, but he was still stronger than I was, and the point of the blade merely scratched his chest. Even as I was fighting to turn the hand again, he shuddered and died. A ruse would not have tricked me, but this was no ruse. I felt every muscle in his body tighten rock hard in a spasm as he fell sideways. My grip on his wrist didn't lessen until the light came on in the room behind me. Only then did I see the ugly yellow stain halfway up the blade of the knife. A quick-acting nerve poison, silent and deadly. There, on the sleeve of my shirt, was a thin yellow mark where the blade had brushed me. I knew these poisons didn't need a puncture. They could work just as well on the naked skin. With infinite caution, struggling against the fatigue that wanted my hands to shake, I peeled my shirt slowly off. Only when it had been hurled on top of the corpse did I let myself drop backwards, gasping for air. My leg could work now. Oh, it hurt hideously. It must have been bruised but not broken since it supported my weight. Turning, I stumbled to the high window and threw it open. Light streamed out on the body behind me. Angelina was sitting up in bed, her face smooth and her hands folded on the covers in front of her, only her eyes showing any awareness of what had happened. Dead, I said with a dry throat and spat to clear it. Killed by his own poison. I stumped into the room, testing my leg. I was sleeping. I didn't hear him open the window, she said. Thank you. Actress, liar, cheat, murderess. She had played 100 roles in countless voices, yet when she said those final words there was a ring of unforged feeling. To them, this murder attempt had come too soon after the earlier traumatic scene. Her defenses were still down, her real emotions showing. Her hair hung to her shoulders, brushing the single ribbons of her nightgown, which was made of some thin and soft fabric, intimate. This sight, on top of the events of the evening, removed any reserve I might have had. I was kneeling by the bed, holding her shoulders and staring deep into her eyes, trying to reach what lay behind them. The locky, with the broken chain, lay on the bedside table. I grabbed it in my fist. Don't you realize this girl doesn't exist except in your own memory, I said, and Angelina didn't move. It's past like everything else. You were a baby now. You're a woman. You were a little girl, now you're a woman. You may have been this girl, but you are not anymore. With a convulsive movement, I turned and hurled the thing out of the window into the darkness. You're none of those things of the past, and... Jelena, I said with an intensity louder than a shout. You are yourself, just yourself. Kissed her then, and there was no trace of the pushing away or rejection there had been before. As I needed her, she needed me. Chapter 18. Dawn was just touching the sky when I brought the assassin's body into the Count. I was deprived of the pleasure of waking him since the sergeant of the guard had already done this when the roof sentry had been discovered. The guard was dead too, from a tiny puncture of the same poison-tipped blade. The guardsmen and the Count were all gathered around the body on the floor of the Count's sitting room and chattering away about this mystery, the inexplicable death of the sentry. They didn't see me until I dropped my corpse down by the other one, and they all jumped back. Here's the killer, I told them, not without a certain amount of pride. Count Cassiter must have recognized the thug because he gave a shuddering start and popped his eyes. No doubt an ex-relative, brother-in-law or something. I imagined he hadn't believed that the Raidbrechen family would really go through with their threats of revenge. A certain uneasiness about the guard sergeant gave me my first cue that I was imagining wrong. The sergeant glanced back and forth from the corpse to the Count, and I wondered what thoughts were going through his shaven and thick-skulled military head. There were wheels within wheels here, and I would lie. To have known what was going on, I made a mental note to have a buddy-to-buddy talk with Sarge at the first opportunity. The Count chewed his cheek and cracked his knuckles over the bodies, and finally ordered them dragged out. Stay here, he said as I started to leave with the others. I dropped into a chair while he locked the rest out. Then he made a rush for the bar and choked down about a water glass full of the local spirits. Only when he was working on his second glass did he remember to offer me some of this potable aqua regia. I wasn't saying no, and while I sipped at it, I wondered what he was so upset about. First, the Count checked the locks on all the doors and sealed the single window. His ring key unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, and he took out a small electronic device with controls and an extendable aerial on top. Well, look at that, I said when he pulled out the aerial. He didn't answer me, just shot. A long look at me from under his eyebrows and went back to adjusting the thing. Only when it was turned on and the green light glowed on the top did he relax a bit. "You know what this is?" he asked, pointing at the gadget. "Of course," I said. "But not from seeing them on Fravor. They aren't that common." "They aren't common at all," he mumbled, staring at the green light which glowed steadily. "As far as I know, this is the only one on the planet, so I wish you wouldn't mention it to anybody." "Anybody," he repeated with emphasis. "Not my business," I told him with disarming lack of interest. "I think a man's entitled to his privacy." I liked privacy myself and had used snooper detectors like this. One plenty of times. They could sense electronic or radiation snoopers and gave instant warning. There were ways of fooling them, but it wasn't easy to do. As long as no one knew about the thing, the Count could be sure he wasn't being eavesdropped on. But who would want to do that? He was in the middle of his own building, and even he must know that snooper devices couldn't be worked from a distance. There was distinct smell of rat in the air, and I was beginning to get an idea of what was going on. The Count didn't leave me any doubt as to who the rat was. "You're not a stupid man, Grav Deepstall," he said, which means he thought I was a lot stupider than he was. "You've been off-planet and seen other worlds. You know how backward and suppressed we are here? Or you wouldn't have joined with me to help throw off the yoke around our planet's neck. No sacrifice is too great if it will bring closer this day of liberation." For some reason he was eating now and had resumed his unpleasant habit of cracking the knuckles. The side of his head where Angela had landed the bottle was covered with plastiskin and dry of sweat. I hoped it hurt. "This foreign woman you have been guarding," the Count said, turning sideways but still watching me from the corners of his eyes. "She had been of some help in organizing things, but is now putting us in an embarrassing position. There has been one attempt on her life, and there will probably be others. The Raidbrechen are an old and loyal family. Her presence is a continued insult to them." Then he pulled at his drink and delivered the punchline. "I think that you can do the job she is doing, just as well and perhaps better. How do you like that?" Without a doubt, I was just brimming over with talent, or there was a shortage of revolutionaries on this planet. This was the second time within 12 hours that I had been offered a partnership in the New Order. One thing I was sure of, though Angelovely's offer had been sincere. Cassie, Duke of Ardenrunt's proposition had a distinctly bad odor to it. I played along to see what he was leading up to. "I am honored, noble Count," I oozed. "But what will happen to the foreign woman? I don't imagine she will think much of the idea. What she thinks is not important." He snarled and touched his fingers lightly to the side of his head. He swallowed and got his temper back under control. "We cannot be cruel to her," he said with one of the most insincere smiles I have ever seen on a human being's face. "We'll just hold her in custody. She has some guards who I imagine will be loyal, but my men will take care of them. You will be with her and arrest her at the proper time. Just turn her over to the jailers who will keep her safe for herself and out of sight where she can cause no more trouble for us." "It's a good plan," I agreed with winning insincerity. "I don't enjoy the thought of putting this poor woman in jail, but if it is necessary to the cause, it must be done. The ends justify the means. You're right. I only wish I was able to state it so clearly. You have a remarkable ability to turn a phrase bent. I'm going to write that down so I can remember it. The ends justify." He scratched away industriously on a note plate. What a knowledge of history! He had just the man to plan a revolution. I searched my memory for a few more old saws to supply him with, until my brain was flooded with a sudden anger. I jumped to my feet. "If we are going to do this, we should not waste any time, Count Ardenrunt," I said. "I suggest 1,800 hours tonight for the action. That will give you enough time to arrange for the capture of her guards. I will be in her rooms and will arrest her as soon as I have a message from you that the first move has succeeded." "You're correct. A man of action is always bent. It will be as you say." We shook hands then, and it took all the willpower I possessed to stop from crushing to a pulp his limp, moist, serpentine paw. I went straight to Angelina. "Can we be overheard here?" I asked her. "No, the room is completely shielded. Your former boyfriend, Count Cassie, has a snooper detector. He may have other equipment for listening to what goes on here." This thought didn't bother Angelic in the slightest. She sat by a mirror, brushing her hair. The scene was lovely but distracting. There were strong winds blowing through the revolution that threatened to knock everything down. "I know about the detector," she said calmly, brushing. "I arranged for him to get it but his knowledge, of course, and made sure it was useless on the best frequencies. I keep a close watch on his affairs that way. Were you listening in a few minutes ago when he was making arrangements with me to kill your guards and throw you into the dungeons downstairs?" "No, I wasn't listening," she said with that amazing self-possession and calm that marked all her actions. She smiled in the mirror at me. "I was busy just remembering last night. Women, they insist on mixing everything up together. Perhaps they operate better that way, but it is very hard on those of us who find that keeping emotion and logic separate produces sounder thinking." I had to make her understand the seriousness of this situation. "Well, if that little bit of news doesn't interest you," I said as calmly as I could, "perhaps this does. The rough raid Brechens didn't send that killer last night, the Count did." Success at last. Angelina actually stopped combing her hair, and her eyes widened a bit at the import of what I said. She didn't ask any stupid questions, but waited for me to finish. "I think you have underestimated the desperation of that rat upstairs when you dropped him with that bottle. Yesterday you pushed him just as far as he could be pushed. He must have had his plans already made, and you made his mind up for him. The sergeant of the guard recognized the assassin and connected him with the Count. That also explains how the killer got access to the roof and knew just where to find you. It's also the best explanation I can imagine for the suddenness of this attack. There's too much coincidence here with the thing happening right after your battle with Cassiter, the Antankerous." Angelina had gone back to combing her hair while I talked, fluffing up the curls. She made no response. Her apparent lack of interest was beginning to try my nerves. "Well, what are you going to do about it?" I asked with more than a little note of peevishness in my voice. "Don't you think it's more important to ask what you are going to do about it?" She delivered this line very lightly, but there was a lot behind it. I saw she was watching me in the mirror, so I turned and went over to the window, looking out over the fatal balcony at the snow-summited mountain peaks beyond. What was I going to do about it? Of course, that was the question here, much bigger than she realized. What was I going to do about the whole thing? Everyone was offering me half-interests in a revolution I hadn't the slightest interest in, or did I? What was I doing here? Had I come to arrest Angelina for the Special Corps? That assignment seemed to have been forgotten a while back. A decision had to be reached soon. My body disguise was good, but not that good. It wasn't intended to stand up to long inspection. Only the fact that Angelina was undoubtedly sure that she had killed me had prevented her from recognizing my real identity so far. I had certainly recognized her easily enough, facial changes and all. Just at this point, the bottom dropped out of everything. There is a little process called selective forgetting, whereby we suppress and distort memories we find distasteful. My disguise hadn't been meant to stand inspection this long. Originally, I had been sure she would have penetrated it by now. With this realization came the memory of what I had said the night before, a wickedly revealing statement that I had pushed back and forgotten until now. "You're none of these things out of the past," I had shouted. "None of these things, Angelina." I had bellowed this, and there had been no protest from her, except that she no longer used the name Angelina. She used the alias Angela here. When I turned to face her, my guilty thoughts must have been scrawled all over my face. But she only gave me that enigmatic smile and said nothing. At least she had stopped combing her hair. "You know I'm not Grav Bent Diebstahl," I said with an effort. "How long have you known?" "For quite a while, since soon after you came here, in fact." "Do you know who I am?" "I have no idea what your real name is, if that's what you mean. But I do remember how angry I was when you tricked me out of the battleships after all my work. and I recall the intense satisfaction with which I shot you in Fraberbad. Can you tell me your name now? Jim, I said through the haze I was rooted in. James diGriz, known as Slippery Jim to the trade. How nice. My name is really Angela. I think it was done as a horrid joke by my father, which is one of the reasons I enjoyed seeing him die. Why haven't you killed me? I asked, having a fairly good idea of how father had passed on. Why should I, darling? She asked, and her light, empty tone was gone. We've both made mistakes in the past, and it has taken us a dreadfully long time to find out that we are just alike. I might as well ask you why you haven't arrested me. That's what you started out to do, isn't it? It was, but what? You must have come here with that idea in mind, but you were fighting an awful battle with yourself. That's why I hid the fact that I knew who you really were. You were growing up, getting over whatever idiotic notions ever involved you with the police in the first place. I had no idea how the whole thing would come out, though I did hope. You see, I didn't want to kill you, not unless I had to. I knew you loved me. That was obvious from the beginning. It was different from the feeble animal passion, all those male brutes who have told me that they love me. They loved a malleable case of flesh. You love me for everything that I am, because we are both the same. We are not the same, I insisted, but there was no conviction in my voice. She only smiled. You kill and enjoy killing, that's our basic difference. Don't you see that? Nonsense. She dismissed the idea with an airy wave. You killed last night, rather a good job too, and I didn't notice any reluctance. Your part, in fact, wasn't there a certain amount of enthusiasm? I don't know why, but I felt as if a noose was tightening around my neck. Everything she said was wrong, but I couldn't see where it was wrong. Where was the way out, the solution that would solve everything? Let's leave Fraber, I said at last. Get away from this monstrous and unnecessary rebellion. There will be deaths and killing and no need for them. We'll go if we go someplace where we can do just as well. Angela said, and there was a hardness back in her voice. That's not the major point, though. There's something you are going to have to settle in your own mind before you will be happy. This stupid importance you attach to death. Don't you realize how completely trivial it is? 200 years from now, I and every person now living in the galaxy will be dead. What does it matter if a few of them are helped along and reach their destination a bit quicker? They'd do the same to you if they had the chance. You're wrong, I insisted, knowing that there is more to living and dying than just this pessimistic philosophy, but unable in this moment of stress to clarify and speak my ideas. Angela was a powerful drug, and my tiny remaining shard of compassionate reserve didn't stand a chance, washed under by the flood of stronger emotions. I pulled her to me, kissing her, knowing that this solved most of the problems, although it made the final solution that much more difficult. A thin and irritating buzz scratched at my ears, and Angela heard it too. Separating was difficult for both of us. I sat and watched unseeingly while she went to the videophone. She blanked the video circuits and snapped a query into it. I couldn't hear the answer because she had the speaker off and listened through the earpiece. Once or twice she said yes and looked up suddenly at me. There was no indication of whom she was talking to, and I hadn't the slightest interest. There were problems enough around. After hanging up, she just stood quietly for a moment, and I waited for her to speak. Instead, she walked to her dressing table and opened the drawer. There were a lot of things that could have been concealed there, but she took out the one thing I was least suspecting, a gun, big-barreled and deadly, pointing at me. Why did you do it, Jim? She asked, tears in the corners of her eyes. Why did you want to do it? She didn't even hear my baffled answer. Her thoughts were on herself, though the recoilless never wavered from a point aimed midway in my skull. With alarming suddenness, she straightened up and angrily brushed at her eyes. You didn't do anything, she said with the old hard chill on her words. I did it myself because I let myself believe that one man could be any different from the others. You have taught me a valuable lesson, and out of gratitude I will kill you quickly instead of in the way I would much prefer. What the hell are you talking about? I roared, completely baffled. Don't play the innocent to the very end, she said, as she reached carefully behind her and drew a small, heavy bag from under the bed. That was the radar, Poe. I installed the equipment myself and have the operators bribed to give me first notice. A ring of ships, as you well know, has dropped from space and surrounded this area. Your job was to keep me occupied so I wouldn't notice. The plan came perilously close to succeeding. She put a coat over her arm and backed across the room. If I told you I was innocent, gave you my most sincere word of honor, would you believe me? I asked. I have nothing to do. This and know nothing about it. Hooray for the boy space scout, Angela said with bitter mockery. Why don't you admit the truth, since you will be dead in 20 seconds no matter what you say? I've told you the truth. I wondered if I could reach her before she fired, but knew it was impossible. Goodbye, James diGriz. It was nice knowing you for a while. Let me leave you with a last pleasant thought. All this was in vain. There is a door and an exit behind me that one knows about. Before your police get here, I shall be safely gone. And if the thought tortures you a bit, I intend to go on killing and killing and killing, and you will never be able to stop me. My Angela raised the gun for a surer aim as she touched a switch in the molding. A panel rolled back, revealing a square of blackness in the wall. Spare me the histrionics, Jim, she said disgustedly, her eyes looking into mine over the sight of the gun. Her finger tightened. I wouldn't expect that kind of juvenile trick from you, staring over my shoulder and widening your eyes as if there were someone behind me. I'm not going to turn and look. You're not getting out of this one alive. Famous last words? As I jumped sideways. The gun boomed, but the bullet plowed into the ceiling. Skip stood behind her, twisting the gun into the air, pulling it out of her hand. Angela just stared at me in horror and made no move to resist. There were handcuffs locked on her tiny wrists, and she still didn't struggle or cry out. I jumped forward, shouting her name. There were two burly types in patrol uniforms behind Skip, and they took her. Before I could reach the door, he stepped through and closed it behind him. I stumbled to a halt before it, as unable to fight as Angela had been a minute ago. Roman 19, have a drink, Skip said, dropping into Angela's chair and pulling out a hip flask. Ersatz Terran brandy, not this local brand of plastic solvent. He offered me a cupful. Drop dead, you? I followed with some of the choicer selections from my interstellar vocabulary and tried to knock the cup out of his hand. He fooled me by raising it and drinking it himself, not in the least annoyed. Is that any kind of language to use on your superior officer in the Special Corps? He asked and refilled the cup. It's a good thing. A relaxed organization without too many rules. Still, there are limits. He held out the cup again, and this time I grabbed it and drained it. Why did you do it? I asked, still racked by conflicting emotions. Because you didn't, that's what. The operation is over. You are a success. Before you were merely on probation, but now you are a full agent. He grubbed in one pocket and pulled out a little gold star made of paper. After licking it carefully and solemnly, he reached out and stuck it to the front of my shirt. I hereby appoint you a full agent of the Special Corps, he intoned, by authority of the power vested in me. Cursing, I reached to pick the damn thing off and laughed instead. It was absurd. It was also a fine commentary on the honors that went with the job. I thought I was no longer a member of the crew, I told him. I never received your resignation, Skip said. Not that it would have meant anything. You can't resign from a corps. Yeah, but I got your message when you gave me a discharge. Or did you forget that I stole a ship, and you set off the scuttling charge by remote to blow me up? As you see, I managed to pull the fuse just before it let go. Nothing of the sort, my boy, he said, settling back to sip his second drink. You were so insistent about looking for the fair Angelina that I thought you might want to borrow a ship before we had a chance to assign you one. The you took had the fuse rigged as it always is on these occasions. The fuse, not the charge, is set to explode 5 seconds after it is removed. I find this gives a certain independence of mind to prospective agents who regret her manner of departure. You mean the whole thing was a frame-up? I gurgled. You might say that. I prefer the term graduating exercise. This is the time when we find out if our crooked novices really will devote the rest of their lives to the pursuit of law and order. When they find out too, we don't want there to be any regrets in later years. You found out, didn't you, Jim? I found out something I'm not quite sure what yet, I said, still not able to talk out the one thing closest to me. It was a fine operation. I must say you showed a lot of imagination in the way you carried it out. Then he frowned. But that business with the bank, I can't say I approve of it. The Corps has all the funds you will need. Same money, I snapped. Where does the Corps get it? From planetary governments, and where do they get it from? Taxes, of course, so I take it directly from the bank. The insurance company pays the bank for the loss. N declares a smaller income that year, pays less taxes to the government, and the result is exactly the same as your way? Skip was well acquainted with this brand of logic, so didn't even bother to answer. I still didn't want to talk. About Angela. How did you find me? I asked. There was no bug on the ship. Simple child of nature that you are, Skip said, raising his hands in feigned horror. Do you really think that any of our ships aren't bugged, and the job done so well it cannot be detected if you don't know where to look? For your information, the apparently solid outer door of the space lock contains quite a complex transmitter, strong enough for us to detect at quite a distance. Then, where? Didn't I hear it? For the simple reason that it wasn't broadcasting. I should add that the door also contains a receiver. The device only transmits when it receives the proper signal. We gave you time to reach your destination, and then followed you. We lost you for a while in Freiberbad, but picked up your trail again in the hospital, right after you played musical chairs with the corpses. We lent you a hand there. The hospital was justifiably annoyed, but we managed to keep them quiet. After that, it was just a matter of keeping an eye on doctors and surgical equipment, since your next move was obvious. I hope you'll be pleased to know that you are carrying a very compact little transmitter in your stir. I looked at my chest, but of course saw nothing. It was too good an opportunity to miss, Skip went on. There was no stopping the man. One night when you were under sedation, the good doctor found the alcohol we had seen fit to include in one of your supply packages. He, of course, took advantage of this shipping error, and a Corps surgeon made a little operation of his own. Then you have been following me and watching ever since? That's right. But this was your case, just as much as it would have been if you knew we were there. Then, why did you move in for the kill like this? I snapped. I didn't blow the whistle for the Marines. This was the big question of the hour and the only one that mattered to me. Skip took his time about answering. It's like this, he drawled, and took a sip of his drink. I like a new man to have enough rope, but not so much that he will hang himself. You were here for what might be called a goodly long time, and I wasn't receiving any reports about revolutions or arrests you had made. What could I say? His voice was quieter, more sympathetic. Would you have arrested her if we hadn't moved in? That was the question. I don't know, was all I could say. I damn well knew what I was going to do, he said with the old venom. So I did it. The plot is well nipped before it could bud, and our multiple murderess is off planet by now. Let her go, I shouted as I grabbed him by the fray end of the jacket and swung him free of the ground and shook him. Let her go, I tell you. Would you turn her loose again the way she is? Was all he answered. Would I? I suppose I wouldn't. I dropped him while I was thinking about it, and he straightened out the wrinkles in the front of his suit. This has been a rough assignment for you, he said, as he started to put the flask away. At times, there can be a very thin line between right and wrong. If you are emotionally involved, the in is almost impossible to see. What will happen to her? I asked. He hesitated before he answered. The truth for a change, I told him. All right, the truth. No promises, but the psych boys might be able to do something with her. If they can find the cause of the basic aberration, but that can be impossible to find at times. Not in this case, I can tell them. He looked surprised at that, giving me some small satisfaction. In that case, there might be a chance. They'll give positive orders that everything is to be tried before they even consider anything like personality removal. If that is done, she is just another body. of which there are plenty in the galaxy. Sentenced to death, she's just another corpse, of which there is an equal multitude. I grabbed the flask away from him before it reached his pocket and opened it. "I know you in Skip," I said as I poured. "You're a born recruiting sergeant. When you lick them, make them join." "Wha? Else," he said. "She'd make a great agent. We'd make a great team," I told him, and we raised our cups. Here's to crime.